Hey everyone. Tonight we're exploring something that will make you think twice about walking into the woods alone. Something that's been happening for decades, maybe centuries, and that no one can adequately explain. We're talking about people who vanish in forests and wilderness areas under circumstances that defy logic. People who disappear without a trace, despite massive search efforts. People found in locations that make no sense. People who vanish and reappear with stories that are impossible to believe but impossible to dismiss. These aren't simple cases of people getting lost. These are disappearances that follow disturbing patterns. Patterns that suggest something beyond natural causes. Patterns that experienced law enforcement and search and rescue professionals can't explain. Patterns that have been documented, studied, and compiled into what's known as the missing 411 phenomenon. For the next several hours, we're going to explore these cases in detail. The disappearances that shouldn't happen. The discoveries that make no sense. The survival stories that defy explanation, and the disturbing patterns that emerge when you look at hundreds of cases together. Before we begin, go ahead and like this video if you're ready to confront the mysteries hiding in our forests. Subscribe if you want to explore the unexplained disappearances that authorities can't solve. And leave a comment telling me if you've ever had a strange experience in the wilderness. Now settle in, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself. Because what you're about to hear will change how you think about the woods forever. Let's start with a case that demonstrates just how strange these disappearances can be. In July 2004, a 2-year-old boy named Keith Parkins disappeared from his family's campsite in Idaho. The family was camping in the Ritter Hot Springs area, a remote location surrounded by dense forest. Keith's parents turned their backs for literally 2 minutes while setting up camp. When they looked back, Keith was gone. They immediately began searching and called for help. Within hours, search and rescue teams arrived with tracking dogs, helicopters, and dozens of trained searchers. The terrain around the campsite was difficult but not impossible. Dense forest with some steep areas, but a 2-year-old couldn't have traveled far in the time he was missing. Search teams established a perimeter based on how far a toddler could possibly walk. They searched every inch of that area. Nothing. They expanded the search radius beyond what should have been possible for a small child. Still nothing. For 19 hours, over 100 searchers combed the area. Tracking dogs couldn't pick up a scent trail beyond a few feet from where Keith was last seen. Then, 19 hours later, a searcher found Keith. Alive, unhurt, and 12 miles from the campsite. 12 miles through dense wilderness that adults would struggle to navigate. 12 miles in less than a day, for a 2-year-old child. Keith was found on the other side of a mountain ridge, across terrain that should have been impossible for him to cross. When asked where he'd been, Keith said a bear took care of him. Kept him warm. Kept him safe. His parents were relieved beyond words that he was alive. But search and rescue professionals were deeply disturbed. 12 miles in 19 hours for a toddler is physically impossible. Over mountainous terrain in wilderness that adults find challenging. The tracking dogs should have been able to follow his scent. But they couldn't, as if Keith had been carried or somehow transported. And what about the bear that supposedly took care of him? One searcher said, "I've been doing search and rescue for 20 years. I've seen a lot of strange cases, but this one haunts me. That child couldn't have gotten where we found him by walking. The terrain, the distance, the time frame, none of it makes sense. And he was perfectly fine, not traumatized, not injured, like someone or something protected him the entire time." Keith's case displays several characteristics that appear repeatedly in missing 411 cases. Disappearance happened quickly, in a matter of minutes or seconds. Search dogs couldn't track the missing person effectively. The person was found at a distance that seems impossible given the time frame and their physical capabilities. The person was found in good condition, despite conditions that should have caused hypothermia or injury. The person has a strange story or memory gap about what happened. These patterns appear over and over in cases across North America and beyond. Let's talk about another case that shows different disturbing patterns. In June 2005, Dennis Martin, a 6-year-old boy, disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis was with his family and another family, camping in a popular area of the park. The children were playing near the adults, who were in clear view. 4 children, including Dennis, decided to play a game. They were going to sneak up on the adults and scare them. The 4 children went behind some bushes, planning to jump out and surprise the adults. 3 children jumped out seconds later. Dennis didn't. The adults immediately searched the area. Dennis was nowhere to be found. Within an hour, park rangers were notified, and search operations began. This became one of the largest search operations in national park history. Over 1,400 searchers, including military personnel, searched for Dennis. Helicopters with thermal imaging. Tracking dogs. Mounted rangers on horseback. Searchers on foot covering every inch of terrain. The search continued for days with no trace of Dennis. Then came reports that complicated everything. A family camping on a ridge above where Dennis disappeared reported hearing a tremendous scream around the time Dennis vanished. Not a child's scream, but something else. Something that made them deeply uncomfortable. Another witness, a Key family, reported seeing something strange shortly after Dennis disappeared. They saw what they described as a rough-looking man, moving through the forest with what appeared to be something over his shoulder. The description was disturbing, unkempt, moving quickly through difficult terrain, carrying something. Park rangers investigated this lead extensively, but they never found any trace of this individual. No tracks, no evidence, nothing. Dennis Martin was never found. Despite the massive search effort, despite the hundreds of trained personnel, despite the extensive area covered, 6-year-old Dennis vanished in seconds, in an area with multiple adults nearby, and disappeared so completely that no trace was ever found. The Key family sighting raises disturbing questions. If they did see someone carrying Dennis, who was it? Why was there no evidence of this person despite intensive searching? How did this person move so quickly through terrain that searchers found difficult? One retired park ranger who participated in the search said the Dennis Martin case is the one that changed me. I stopped believing that wilderness disappearances always have natural explanations. That child vanished in seconds with adults right there. We had over 1,400 trained searchers and found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace. That's not normal. That's not how search and rescue usually works. We should have found something. Now let's discuss what makes these cases different from ordinary missing person cases. In typical missing person situations, searchers find evidence, tracks, disturbed vegetation, personal items, something. The person usually travels in a predictable direction. Search dogs can track their scent. Bodies are usually found within the search radius based on the person's physical capabilities. But missing 411 cases don't follow these patterns. The missing person vanishes completely, often with no tracks or scent trail. If found, they're located in places that don't make sense given time and distance. Personal items, especially shoes, are often missing or found in strange locations. Search dogs behave strangely, refusing to track or tracking to a point and stopping as if the scent vanished. Bodies, when found, are discovered in areas that were previously searched multiple times. The person is often found near water or in water, even if they had to travel significant distances to reach it. The person is sometimes found on the opposite side of obstacles, like mountain ridges or rivers that they shouldn't have been able to cross. Weather often turns bad during the search, hampering efforts. If the person is found alive, they often have no memory of what happened or tell stories that don't make sense. These patterns have been documented by David Polides, a former police detective who has spent years researching these cases. He's compiled thousands of cases that share these unusual characteristics. Cases where experienced search and rescue professionals say this doesn't make sense. Cases where the evidence doesn't fit normal patterns of how people get lost in wilderness. Let's look at more cases that demonstrate these patterns. In October 1981, Stacy Aris disappeared in Yosemite National Park. Stacy was 14 years old, visiting the park with her father and several other people. They were on a horseback trip, a guided excursion in a popular area of the park. At one point, Stacy was riding just 50 feet behind her father. The terrain was open, visibility was good. Her father looked back, and Stacy was gone. Horse and rider vanished. The search began immediately, with the advantage that it started right away while the trail was fresh. Search and rescue teams flooded the area, but they found no trace of Stacy or her horse. Days into the search, they found Stacy's horse. The horse was found miles from where Stacy disappeared, in an area that would have required crossing difficult terrain. But Stacy wasn't with the horse. And disturbingly, the saddle was missing. Tracking dogs couldn't pick up Stacy's scent beyond the point where she disappeared. Searchers checked every cave, every ravine, every possible location. Nothing. Stacy Aris was never found. 14 years old, experienced with horses. Disappeared in seconds with her father 50 feet away. Horse found miles away without saddle or rider. No trace of Stacy, despite extensive searching. One search and rescue member said, "The horse was the strangest part. We found it far from the trail, across terrain that would have been difficult to cross. The saddle was gone, which makes no sense. If Stacy fell off, the saddle would still be on the horse. If she dismounted, why take the saddle? And where is she? That horse should have led us to her, but it didn't." Let's talk about another case with different disturbing elements. In June 2011, Dior Kunz Jr., A 2-year-old boy disappeared from a campsite in Idaho. Dior was camping with his parents and great-grandfather at Timber Creek Campground. According to his parents, Dior was playing near the campsite. They turned their attention away briefly, and he was gone. Search and rescue was called immediately. Extensive search operations covered the area thoroughly, but here's where this case gets strange and controversial. Search dogs couldn't pick up Dior's scent leading away from the campsite. It was as if the child never left the immediate area, yet he wasn't there. The search expanded to include underwater searches of the nearby creek and reservoir. Nothing was found. Private investigators and law enforcement became suspicious of the parents' story. Inconsistencies emerged in their accounts. Some investigators believe Dior died at the campsite and his parents covered it up. Others believe something else happened that the family isn't being truthful about. But if the parents were responsible, where is Dior? Despite suspicions and investigations, no evidence of what happened to him has been found. The case remains unsolved, with the official status being that Dior disappeared and hasn't been found. What makes this case relevant to missing 411 patterns is the complete lack of physical evidence. If Dior wandered off, there should be tracks, scent trail, something. If Dior died at the campsite and was hidden, searchers should have found forensic evidence. If Dior drowned, the body should have been found in the water searches. Yet there's nothing. A 2-year-old child has completely vanished despite intensive searching and investigation. One private investigator on the case said, "I've worked hundreds of missing person cases. This one defies every pattern I know. We should have found something. Body, evidence, tracks, anything." The complete absence of any physical evidence is the most disturbing aspect. It's like the child ceased to exist. Now let's discuss a case where the person was found alive, but with a story that's impossible to reconcile with the facts. In July 1998, Jared Adadaro, a 3-year-old boy, disappeared in the Roosevelt National Forest in Colorado. Jared was on a hiking trip with a Christian singles group that his father had sent him on. The group was hiking on a well-marked trail. Jared was walking with several adults. At one point, the adults noticed Jared wasn't with them anymore. They searched the immediate area and called for help. Search and rescue teams arrived and began extensive operations. The area was searched thoroughly. Days turned into weeks with no trace of Jared. Then years later, in 2003, hikers found a child's jacket and shoe. The items were identified as Jared's. The location where the items were found was on a mountain slope far from the trail, an area that had been searched multiple times during the initial search. Later, more of Jared's remains were found in the same general area. Forensic analysis showed that animals had scattered the remains. But the location raised disturbing questions. How did a 3-year-old get so far from the trail, up a mountainside across terrain that was difficult? And why weren't these items found during the initial searches? The area had been covered by search teams multiple times. Jared's father has always maintained that something took his son, that Jared couldn't have gotten where his remains are found by himself. The official explanation is that Jared wandered off the trail, became lost, and died from exposure. Animals then scattered the remains, which were eventually found years later. But experienced outdoorsmen and search and rescue professionals who know the terrain have expressed doubt. One SR volunteer familiar with the area said the location where Jared's remains were found is not somewhere a 3-year-old could reach easily. The terrain is steep and difficult, and we searched that area during the initial operation. We should have found something if he had been there. The fact that items appeared years later in a previously searched location is disturbing and doesn't fit normal patterns. Let's talk about search dog behavior in these cases, because it's one of the most consistent and disturbing patterns. Search and rescue dogs are highly trained. They can track human scent across miles, through difficult terrain, even after significant time has passed. In normal search situations, dogs are remarkably effective. They pick up the scent trail and follow it to where the person went. But in missing 411 cases, search dogs frequently fail in ways that handlers can't explain. Dogs refuse to search, showing fear or reluctance to enter certain areas. Dogs track to a specific point and then stop, as if the scent simply ends. Dogs become confused or disoriented, unable to pick up any trail. Dogs behave in ways their handlers have never seen before, displaying stress or fear. In the Keith Parkins case we discussed earlier, dogs tracked only a few feet from where he disappeared, then lost the scent completely. In the Dennis Martin case, multiple dog teams couldn't establish a track beyond the immediate area. In the Stacey Ara's case, dogs lost her scent right where she was last seen. This pattern repeats across hundreds of cases. Experienced dog handlers are deeply disturbed by this. One K9 SR handler with over 20 years of experience said, "I've worked hundreds of searches. Dogs are reliable, consistent, they find scent trails even in difficult conditions. But I've worked on cases where my dog, who never fails, couldn't pick up anything. Just stops, looks around confused, won't track, as if the scent isn't there at all. That shouldn't happen. Human scent doesn't just disappear, but in these cases, it's like the person was never there, or was removed in a way that leaves no scent trail. Some searchers have proposed disturbing explanations for this pattern. If the missing person was carried, especially if they were carried by someone or something that covered their scent, dogs might not be able to track. If the person was taken into water immediately, the scent trail would be disrupted. If the person was removed from the area quickly by vehicle or aircraft, there would be minimal scent trail. But many of these cases occur in remote wilderness areas, where vehicles can't go and aircraft would be obvious. And the speed of disappearance often makes these explanations impractical. The dog behavior remains one of the most puzzling aspects of these cases. Now let's discuss another disturbing pattern: people found without shoes or with clothing missing. In an unusually high number of these cases, when the missing person is found alive or deceased, they're missing shoes. Sometimes they're completely undressed or partially undressed. This has led to theories about paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where people dying from hypothermia remove their clothing. Paradoxical undressing is real and well documented. As hypothermia progresses, people sometimes feel hot and remove clothing. But this explanation doesn't fit all cases. Sometimes the missing person is found quickly, before hypothermia would have set in. Sometimes shoes are found carefully placed or arranged, not discarded randomly. Sometimes only specific items are missing while other clothing remains. Sometimes the person is found alive and doesn't remember removing the items. Let's look at a specific case. In August 2012, Chris Fowler, an experienced hiker, disappeared while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in Washington state. Chris was fit, experienced, had proper equipment, and was in communication with family regularly. He disappeared from a section of trail that, while remote, was well traveled during hiking season. Despite extensive searches, Chris wasn't found. Years later, in 2016, his remains were discovered by a hunter. The location was far off the trail, in terrain that would have been difficult and would require a significant detour. Chris's boots were found neatly placed some distance from his remains. Not discarded carelessly as someone dying from exposure might do. Placed deliberately, almost arranged. This detail bothered investigators and search personnel. Why would an experienced hiker remove his boots in wilderness conditions? Why were they placed rather than simply dropped? What led him so far from the trail? The official explanation involves disorientation from some medical event causing Chris to leave the trail and remove his boots before dying. But those familiar with the case find this explanation unsatisfying. Chris was healthy, experienced, had no history of medical issues. The boot placement doesn't match patterns of confused or disoriented behavior. One forensic investigator said, "The boots being carefully placed is strange. If someone is dying from exposure or medical emergency, they don't arrange their belongings neatly. They drop things, they're not organized." Neat placement suggests intention, not distress, but what intention? Why would an experienced hiker carefully remove and place his boots, then continue to where he died? It doesn't make sense. This pattern of missing shoes or carefully arranged clothing appears in numerous cases. Children found without shoes after disappearing in terrain that would be painful to walk barefoot. Adults found with shoes removed and placed nearby, sometimes neatly, sometimes in strange arrangements. People found partially undressed with clothing arranged in ways that don't match hypothermia patterns. It's as if something about these disappearances involves the removal or loss of shoes specifically. Some researchers have proposed explanations ranging from logical to disturbing. Maybe people are carried or moved, and shoes fall off during transport. Maybe people are told or compelled to remove shoes by someone or something. Maybe there's a psychological component to whatever causes these disappearances that makes people remove shoes. Maybe shoes are taken deliberately by whatever is responsible for the disappearances. None of these explanations are fully satisfying, but the pattern is too consistent to ignore. Let's talk about another deeply disturbing pattern: berries. In a statistically unusual number of cases, missing people are found in or near berry patches. Sometimes they're found alive with berry stains on their hands and face. Sometimes they're found deceased in the middle of berry bushes. Sometimes witnesses report the missing person was going to pick berries before disappearing. This pattern is strange enough that it's been noted by multiple investigators. Why berries? Is it simply that people go to berry patches naturally, and that's where incidents happen? Or is there something about berry patches specifically that's connected to these disappearances? Let's look at a case. In August 1897, a 6-year-old girl named Ida Mae Curtis disappeared in the San Bernardino Mountains in California. Ida was picking berries with her parents near their campsite. Her parents could see her picking berries, just a short distance away. They turned their attention away briefly. When they looked back, Ida was gone. Search parties formed immediately, and searched for days. The area where Ida had been picking berries showed no signs of struggle or disturbance. Days later, Ida was found alive several miles from where she disappeared. She was in a berry patch. When asked what happened, Ida's story was disturbing. She said she heard her grandmother calling her. Her grandmother had died 2 years earlier. Ida followed the voice deeper into the forest. She said her grandmother led her to berries and water, kept her safe. Eventually, her grandmother led her to where searchers could find her. The adults were relieved to have Ida back, but deeply unsettled by her story. A 6-year-old traveling several miles through wilderness terrain, surviving, and ending up in a berry patch with a story about a dead grandmother guiding her. One researcher compiling historical disappearance cases said the Ida Mae Curtis case is one of the earliest documented cases with typical missing 411 patterns. The berry connection, the impossible distance traveled, the strange story from the child, the quick disappearance despite parents being nearby. These patterns go back over a century, maybe longer. Whatever causes these cases has been happening for a very long time. The berry connection appears in modern cases too. In July 2013, 3-year-old Keenan Healy disappeared in the mountains of British Columbia, Canada. Keenan was at a family cabin with his parents and grandmother. The adults were inside for just a few minutes. When they came out, Keenan was gone. Search and rescue teams responded quickly and searched extensively. The terrain was rugged, with steep slopes and dense forest. Keenan was found the next day, over a mile from the cabin. He was in a berry patch. A 3-year-old traveling over a mile through difficult terrain and ending up in berries. Keenan told his rescuers that a bear watched over him, kept him safe, kept him company. His family was grateful he was alive and didn't focus on the strangeness of his account. But searchers were puzzled by how far he traveled and where he ended up. The bear story and berry patch are now familiar elements in these cases. Let's discuss another pattern. Granite. A statistically high number of these disappearances occur in areas with granite formations or granite bedrock. National parks and wilderness areas with significant granite, Yosemite, Great Smoky Mountains, Shenandoah, many areas of the Rockies. These are also places with high numbers of these strange disappearances. Is this correlation meaningful or coincidence? Some researchers have proposed that granite's properties might be relevant. Granite contains quartz crystals. Quartz has piezoelectric properties, generating electricity when compressed. Could areas with high granite content have unusual electromagnetic properties? Could these properties affect human navigation, consciousness, or make the area attractive to something we don't understand? This is speculative, but the correlation is notable enough that researchers have documented it. One geologist who studied this pattern said the granite correlation is interesting. Many disappearance hotspots are in granite-heavy areas. Granite does have unusual properties. Whether those properties are relevant to disappearances is unknown, but it's a pattern that deserves further study. Now let's talk about time distortion reported by survivors. In cases where the missing person is found alive and can communicate, they sometimes report that time felt strange. What seemed like hours to them was actually days. Or they have complete memory gaps where days passed, but they remember only minutes. Let's look at a case. In September 2016, a 66-year-old woman named Geraldine Largay disappeared while hiking the Appalachian Trail in Maine. Gary, as she was known, was an experienced hiker doing a through hike of the trail. She stepped off the trail to use the bathroom and became disoriented. Gary survived for weeks in the wilderness. She kept a journal documenting her experience. The journal entries show she was rational, alert, and trying to survive. But one entry stands out. She wrote that she couldn't understand how so much time had passed. She felt like she'd been lost for days, but her journal showed weeks had gone by. Gary eventually died from exposure, but her journal provided rare insight into the experience of being lost. The time confusion she expressed is notable. How could someone keeping a daily journal lose track of time that severely? Gary's case is tragic and heartbreaking. But her journal gave researchers data about the experience of being lost that few survivors can provide. The time distortion she described appears in other survivor accounts. Children who think they were gone for hours when they were missing for days. Adults who have no memory of significant portions of their time missing. People who feel like they just sat down for a moment, but hours or days have passed. This pattern suggests something about these disappearances, affects perception of time. Whether it's psychological stress, environmental factors, or something else is unknown. Now let's discuss one of the most disturbing patterns people found in areas that were already searched. In case after case, the missing person or their remains are found in locations that search teams already covered. Sometimes they're found in areas that were searched multiple times by different teams. This raises deeply disturbing questions. If the person was there during the search, why didn't searchers find them? If the person wasn't there during the search, how did they get there later? Let's examine a specific case. In May 2016, 74-year-old Carol Minogue disappeared while hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains. Carol was hiking with her daughter and grandson on a popular trail. At one point, Carol said she wanted to rest and would catch up. Her daughter and grandson continued ahead, planning to wait for Carol at a specific point. Carol never arrived. Search operations began immediately. The trail was searched thoroughly, along with the surrounding area. Days of intensive searching found no trace of Carol. Then 6 days after she disappeared, Carol's body was found. On the trail she had been hiking, in an area that had been searched multiple times. The body was on the trail itself, visible, not hidden or concealed. How was she missed during multiple searches? Search teams included trained personnel who should have seen her. The official explanation was that searchers somehow missed her despite her being on the trail they searched. But this explanation troubled those involved. One searcher said, "I walked that trail multiple times during the search. Carl was found in a section I personally covered. She was on the trail, not hidden. I should have seen her. How did I miss her? How did multiple teams miss her? It doesn't make sense unless she wasn't there when we searched, and was placed there later. But by what? By whom?" This pattern repeats frequently. Bodies found in previously searched areas. Items found in locations that were covered during the initial search. Evidence appearing in places that multiple search teams cleared. This suggests either search teams are far more ineffective than we believe, consistently missing obvious evidence, or the person items weren't there during searches and appeared later. If they appeared later, how? If the person was alive and mobile, why would they stay hidden during searches and then reveal themselves after? If someone moved the body or items, who and why? Some search and rescue professionals have proposed disturbing possibilities. Maybe something is moving the bodies or items, placing them where they'll be found after the initial search ends. Maybe people are being held somewhere during searches and released or deposited afterward. Maybe there's something about the consciousness or state of missing people that makes them undetectable during searches, even when they're physically present. These explanations sound like something from a horror movie, but the pattern is real and documented. People and evidence appearing in searched areas is one of the most disturbing, consistent elements of these cases. Let's talk about weather patterns. In a significant number of these cases, weather changes dramatically during the search. Sunny conditions when the person disappears, storm moving in during the search. Mild weather suddenly turning cold and wet, storms appearing that weren't forecast and hampering search efforts. Is this coincidence or pattern? Weather complicates searches significantly. Rain washes away scent trails. Storms ground helicopters. Cold weather reduces how long someone can survive. In some cases, it's as if the weather is working against the search. Let's look at the Dennis Martin case again. When Dennis disappeared, weather was good. The next day, a storm moved in. Rain, cold temperatures, fog. The storm significantly hampered search efforts for days. By the time weather cleared, any tracks or scent trails were gone. In the Keith Parkins case, storms moved through during the search period. In the Jared Adodero case, weather turned bad during the search. This pattern appears frequently enough that some researchers have noted it. Is it meaningful, or are we pattern matching on coincidence? Weather in mountain and wilderness areas is variable. Storms happen. But the timing, in case after case, seems unusual. One meteorologist who reviewed weather data for multiple cases said, "I can't say definitively that weather patterns in these cases are unusual. Mountains create their own weather, storms happen. But the frequency with which weather turns bad during these searches, often suddenly and sometimes when forecasts didn't predict it, is notable. It could be coincidence. Or it could be that whatever causes these disappearances is somehow associated with weather changes." Now let's discuss cases where people disappear from or near their vehicle. These cases are particularly disturbing because they often involve adults who are experienced and capable. The person stops their vehicle, steps out briefly, and vanishes. Let's look at the case of Tom Messick. In October 2003, Tom Messick, a teacher and outdoorsman, was driving through the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. Tom was familiar with the area and was simply driving through when he stopped at a trailhead. According to the last communication, Tom was checking out a trail, planning to return shortly. He never returned. His vehicle was found at the trailhead, locked, with his belongings inside. Tom's dog was in the vehicle, unharmed. Search operations began and covered the area extensively. No trace of Tom was found. No tracks, no evidence of where he went or what happened. Tom Messick vanished from beside his locked vehicle with his dog inside in broad daylight. In 2006, remains were found that were eventually identified as Tom's. The location was miles from the trailhead, in terrain that would have required intentional travel. What made Tom leave his vehicle, lock his dog inside, and travel miles into the wilderness? Nothing in Tom's background suggests mental health issues or suicidal ideation. He was an experienced outdoorsman who knew the dangers. The case remains unexplained. One investigator said Tom Messick made a conscious decision to lock his dog in the vehicle. That's not the action of someone disoriented or in distress. Then he walked miles into the wilderness and died. Why? What could motivate that behavior? We don't know. The case doesn't fit any pattern of rational behavior or typical causes of wilderness death. Vehicle-related disappearances happen frequently in these cases. People who pull over for unknown reasons and vanish. People who leave their vehicles with belongings inside and are never seen again. People who appear to have left their vehicles voluntarily but end up deceased in locations that don't make sense. These cases are particularly frustrating because the vehicle usually contains clues about the person's plans and state of mind. But those clues often don't help explain what happened. Let's talk about disappearances near water. A very high percentage of these cases involve water in some way. The person disappears near a river, lake, or stream. If found alive, they're often near water or in water. If found deceased, the body is often in or near water, even if they had to travel far to reach it. This pattern has been noted by multiple researchers. Why water? Is it because water attracts people naturally? Is there something about water that's connected to these disappearances? Let's look at the case of Aaron Hedges and his friends. In September 2014, 4 men went on a hunting trip in the crazy mountains of Montana. Aaron Hedges, age 41, and 3 friends set up camp near a creek. On September 7th, Aaron went hunting alone. He never returned to camp. His friends searched and then reported him missing. Extensive search operations covered the area for weeks. Aaron was an experienced hunter and outdoorsman, familiar with the area. Despite intensive searching, Aaron wasn't found. Disturbing details emerged during the search. Other hunters in the area reported hearing screams the night Aaron disappeared. Not normal wilderness sounds, but human screams that stopped abruptly. Aaron's friends reported strange experiences at the camp. Feelings of being watched. Unusual sounds in the night. A sense that something was wrong with the area. Aaron Hedges was never found. But in 2018, remains were found that were eventually identified through DNA as Aaron's. The remains were found near water, in an area that had been searched during the initial operation. The crazy mountains have a reputation locally. Native Americans traditionally avoided certain areas. Modern hunters and hikers report strange experiences. Multiple disappearances have occurred in this mountain range. Aaron's case fits disturbing patterns. Experienced outdoorsman disappearing suddenly, screams heard, remains found, near water in a previously searched area. One local guide familiar with the crazy mountains said, "That range has something wrong with it. I don't go there anymore. Too many people disappearing, too many strange experiences. Native peoples knew to avoid it. We should listen to that wisdom." The water connection appears in case after case. Bodies found in creeks or rivers. People found near lakes when they had no reason to travel to water. Drownings in shallow water that doesn't make sense. It's as if water draws people, or whatever is responsible for these disappearances is associated with water. Now let's discuss a particularly disturbing subset of cases, cluster areas. Certain geographic locations have unusually high numbers of these mysterious disappearances. Not just popular areas where more people mean more incidents, but specific locations where disappearance rates are far higher than would be expected. Yosemite National Park has an unusually high number of these cases. The Great Smoky Mountains. Crater Lake National Park. The Crazy Mountains in Montana. Mount Rainier National Park. Areas of the Colorado Rockies. These cluster areas suggest that whatever causes these disappearances is geographically concentrated. Something about these specific locations. Is it terrain features? Electromagnetic properties? A geographic isolation? Historical factors? Something else entirely? Researchers have mapped these clusters and found they don't correlate simply with visitor numbers. Some heavily visited parks have relatively few mysterious disappearances. Some less visited areas have disproportionately high numbers. Let's look at Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. Crater Lake is beautiful but has a dark history of disappearances. Charles McCullough disappeared 1974. Samuel Belka disappeared 1996. Albert Ansbach, disappeared 1988, and more. Some of these people were found, some weren't. But the cases share strange elements. People vanishing despite being with others. Searches finding no evidence. Bodies appearing in strange locations. The lake itself has unusual properties. It's the deepest lake in the United States. It's a collapsed volcanic caldera filled with water. It has unusual clarity and color. Native Americans considered it sacred and dangerous. Is there something about Crater Lake specifically that's relevant? One researcher who studied the Crater Lake cases said the number of disappearances at Crater Lake is statistically unusual. It's not the most visited park, but it has disproportionate numbers of these strange cases. There's something about that location, whether it's the geological history, the depth of the lake, the volcanic activity, or something else, that area has an elevated rate of unexplained disappearances. These cluster areas warrant careful study. Understanding what these locations have in common might provide clues to what's causing the disappearances. Let's talk about cases where the missing person is found alive and gives accounts that are difficult to reconcile with reality. These cases are rare, but when they occur, they're deeply disturbing. The person is usually a child who lacks the sophistication to create complex lies, and their stories, while strange, are told with sincerity. Beyond the cases we've already discussed, where children mention bears or dead relatives, there are even stranger accounts. Let's look at the case of a young boy who disappeared in Washington state in the 1980s. The boy, whose name has been kept private, disappeared while camping with his family. He was found 3 days later, cold and hungry, but physically unharmed. When asked where he'd been, the boy described being in a weird place where the trees were different and the sky looked strange. He said people who weren't quite people took him there. They fed him and kept him warm. But everything felt wrong, like he wasn't quite in the normal world. Then they brought him back and left him where he was found. The boy was checked by medical professionals who found no evidence of harm or abuse. His story never changed despite repeated questioning. His family believes he experienced something real, even if they can't explain what. One child psychologist who evaluated the boy said he wasn't making up a story. He believed what he was telling us. He showed consistent details across multiple interviews, but what he described doesn't match any normal experience. The weird places with different trees and strange sky, the not quite people, the feeling of being outside normal reality. He experienced something, but whether it was a psychological response to stress or something else, I can't say. There are multiple cases where children describe similar experiences. Being taken to a place that's wrong somehow. Meeting people or beings that seem off. Time passing strangely. Then being returned. Adult survivors rarely report such experiences, possibly because they rationalize or forget. But children report these experiences sincerely. Are these trauma responses? Hallucinations from stress and exposure? Or are children experiencing something real that adults can't or won't acknowledge? Now, let's discuss one of the most controversial aspects of missing 411 research, the reluctance of authorities to acknowledge patterns. National Park Service and other land management agencies are often defensive when asked about these disappearances. They downplay the numbers. They resist suggestions that patterns exist. They're reluctant to release detailed information about cases. Why? Some say it's to avoid panic and protect tourism. Parks rely on visitors, and reports of mysterious disappearances hurt visitation. Others suggest that agencies genuinely don't see patterns, that they view each case as individual rather than part of a larger phenomenon. Still others propose darker explanations that agencies know more than they're saying and are covering up something disturbing. David Paulides, who has researched these cases extensively, has had significant difficulty getting information from the National Park Service. Simple requests for data are often denied or delayed. Freedom of Information Act requests are challenged. Basic questions about disappearance numbers are met with evasiveness. Why would agencies be reluctant to share information about missing people? One theory, liability. If patterns are acknowledged, agencies might be seen as responsible for not preventing disappearances. Another theory, they genuinely don't know what's happening and don't want to admit it. A darker theory, they know something about these cases that they don't want public. One former park ranger who spoke anonymously said there's a culture in the Park Service of not talking about the weird stuff. We see things, we experience things, but we're discouraged from reporting them or discussing them publicly. The official position is that everything has a normal explanation, even when we know it doesn't. We're told to support that narrative or keep quiet. This reluctance from authorities adds to the mystery and frustration. Families of missing people often feel stonewalled by agencies that should be helping them. The lack of transparency fuels speculation and conspiracy theories. Let's talk about technology failures. In modern cases, a disturbing pattern involves technology malfunctioning at critical times. Cell phones that should work don't. GPS devices that fail or give incorrect readings. Cameras that malfunction. Electronic equipment that stops working for no apparent reason. In May 2016, a hiker named David O'Sullivan disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains. David was using a personal locator beacon that should have allowed him to signal for help. The beacon never activated, even though David presumably would have used it if in distress. His cell phone was found with his remains, but showed no record of him attempting to call for help or use it after a certain point. Why didn't David use his technology when in trouble? Was he unable to for some reason? Did the devices fail? Was there something about his situation that prevented their use? This pattern of technology failure appears frequently. Phones that should have signals showing no service. GPS that give wildly wrong positions. Cameras that fail to capture images. Devices that are found with a missing person but show no signs of use despite the person presumably being in distress. One theory is that whatever areas these disappearances occur in have properties that interfere with electronics. Magnetic anomalies, electromagnetic interference, something that causes technology to malfunction. Another theory is that the stress and disorientation of whatever is happening to these people prevents them from thinking to use their devices. A darker theory is that something is deliberately interfering with technology to prevent rescue. The technology failure pattern is yet another disturbing element in these cases. Now let's discuss cases that involve groups, where multiple people disappear, or where groups witness strange events. These cases are particularly significant because they involve multiple witnesses and can't be dismissed as individual confusion or error. In July 2005, two boys, Bryce Herta and Garrett Baxter, both 12 years old, were camping with Garrett's family in the Uinta Mountains of Utah. The two boys went to collect firewood and didn't return. The family searched and called for help. Search and rescue operations began immediately. The boys were found the next day, several miles from camp, separated. Both boys told similar stories independently. They said they heard a woman calling for help. The voice sounded distressed, like someone in trouble. Being helpful boys, they followed the voice to help whoever was in distress. The voice led them deeper into the forest, always just ahead, always calling. Eventually the boys realized they were lost and became frightened. The voice stopped, and they spent the night separately in the woods. When interviewed separately, both boys told the same story about following a woman's voice. But there was no woman. No one else was in that area who could have been calling. The boy's story is disturbing because it suggests deliberate luring, something that could mimic a human voice calling for help, drawing the boys away from safety. One search and rescue member said the fact that both boys told the same story independently gives it credibility. They weren't making it up or influencing each other. They both heard something that sounded like someone needing help, but we found no evidence of anyone else in that area. What were they hearing? Why did it lead them away from camp? The implications are disturbing. Voice mimicry appears in multiple cases. People hearing family members call their names when those family members are elsewhere. Hikers hearing voices that lead them off trail. Children following voices into dangerous areas. Is this auditory hallucination caused by stress or environment? Is it natural phenomena like wind creating sounds that seem like voices? Or is something deliberately mimicking human voices to lure people? In folklore from around the world, there are stories of spirits or entities that use voice mimicry to lure people. Are these old stories based on real phenomena that we've dismissed as superstition? Now let's talk about cases where people are found in positions or states that don't make sense. Bodies found in locations that would have required climbing or navigation that the person wasn't capable of. People found face down in shallow water when they should have been able to stand up. Bodies in positions suggesting peaceful death when the circumstances should have been traumatic. Let's look at a specific case. In August 2017, a woman named Janet Castrojean was found deceased in a creek in Colorado. Janet had been missing for several days after going on a hike. Her body was found face down in about 6 inches of water. The autopsy determined she drowned. But here's what doesn't make sense. Janet was found in water so shallow she could have simply lifted her head to breathe. Was she incapacitated somehow? Did she suffer a medical event that prevented her from lifting her head? Medical examination found no evidence of injury or medical emergency that would explain this. Janet was healthy. There was no indication of why she couldn't simply stand up from 6 inches of water. One investigator said, "The Janet Castrojean case bothers me. Drowning in 6 inches of water suggests something prevented her from raising her head, but we found no evidence of what that something was. No injuries, no medical cause, nothing. It's as if she couldn't or wouldn't lift her head from the water, and we don't know why." This pattern of inexplicable drownings in shallow water appears in multiple cases. People found in creeks or streams that were easily shallow enough to stand in. Bodies positioned in ways that suggest they made no attempt to lift their head from the water. No evidence of what prevented them from saving themselves. It suggests something about the state of consciousness of these people when they entered the water. Were they already unconscious or incapacitated somehow? Were they in an altered state that prevented survival instincts from activating? The mystery of shallow water drownings adds another layer to these cases. Let's discuss the age pattern in these cases. A disproportionate number of disappearances involve either very young children or older adults. Children under 5 and adults over 50 are overrepresented in missing 411 cases compared to normal missing person statistics. Why these age groups? For children, some theories suggest they're more vulnerable physically and easier to abduct if these cases involve foul play. But very young children are also closely supervised usually, making opportunities for abduction limited. The pattern of children disappearing in seconds with adults nearby suggests something other than normal abduction. For older adults, theory suggests they might be more likely to become disoriented or have medical issues. But many of the missing older adults were experienced outdoors people who knew the areas. And the strange circumstances of their disappearances don't fit simple disorientation or medical emergency. One researcher analyzing demographics of these cases said the age distribution is unusual. These are the most vulnerable age groups, but also the most supervised at the young end and most experienced at the older end. If these were simple cases of getting lost, you'd expect to see more cases in the less experienced Middle Ages. The pattern suggests whatever causes these disappearances specifically affects or targets these age groups. Another demographic pattern, people with disabilities or impairments are disproportionately represented. People with cognitive impairments. People with hearing or vision loss. People with physical disabilities. This could suggest vulnerability, but again, these individuals are usually more supervised, not less. The demographic patterns raise uncomfortable questions about whether there's targeting happening. Are certain people more vulnerable to whatever causes these disappearances? Now let's talk about cases where people are found in impossible locations given their physical capabilities. Elderly people with mobility issues found miles away on difficult terrain. Children found on the opposite side of mountain ridges they couldn't have climbed. People with disabilities found in locations they couldn't have reached independently. Let's examine the case of James Dean. In September 1979, James Dean, age 87, disappeared from his farm in Mississippi. James had limited mobility due to age and health issues. He used a cane and could walk only short distances with difficulty. He was last seen near his house. Searches focused on the immediate area, assuming an elderly man with mobility issues couldn't have gone far. Days later, James was found deceased. His body was located 4 miles from his home, across difficult terrain that would have been challenging for a healthy young person. How did an 87-year-old man with limited mobility get 4 miles through difficult terrain? There was no evidence he'd been moved by vehicle. The terrain didn't allow vehicle access to where he was found. Did James walk there somehow? That would have taken enormous effort and time, yet he disappeared within a relatively short window. The case defies explanation based on James's physical capabilities. One investigator said, James Dean shouldn't have been able to reach where we found him. The distance, the terrain, his physical condition, none of it adds up. Either he had help getting there, which raises the question of who and why, or something happened that we don't understand. Neither option is satisfying. These cases of impossible distances given physical capabilities appear repeatedly. Children who shouldn't be able to walk miles, found miles away. Elderly with mobility issues found across terrain they couldn't navigate. People with disabilities found in locations inconsistent with their limitations. This pattern strongly suggests that these people aren't traveling to where they're found under their own power. If they're being moved, who or what is moving them? Let's talk about cases involving indigenous lands or areas with Native American historical significance. Some cluster areas for these disappearances are in regions that were historically important to Native tribes. And some tribes have traditional stories that seem relevant to these disappearances. Stories about people who steal children. Stories about spirits that lure people into the forest. Stories about portals or thin places where people can vanish. Stories about creatures that inhabit the wilderness. Are these stories cultural memory of real phenomena? Many Native Americans refuse to discuss these stories with outsiders. Sacred knowledge that isn't shared, or fear of not being believed or being mocked. But some who have shared stories describe phenomena remarkably similar to what happens in modern missing 411 cases. People being called by name by something that isn't human. Individuals vanishing and reappearing with no memory. Areas of wilderness that are forbidden or dangerous. One native elder who was willing to share some information said, "Our people have always known the forests have things in them that aren't animals or humans, things that can take people, especially children. We teach our children not to wander alone, not to go into certain areas, not to follow voices or things they see. These teachings are survival wisdom passed down for generations. When I hear about modern disappearances in wilderness, I recognize the patterns. This isn't new. It's been happening as long as people have been going into wild places." Respecting indigenous knowledge while being cautious about cultural appropriation is a balance. But dismissing traditional wisdom about dangerous wilderness phenomena would be foolish. Native peoples lived in intimate contact with these environments for thousands of years. If they developed strong cultural prohibitions against certain behaviors or areas, that knowledge shouldn't be ignored. Now let's discuss what search and rescue professionals say when they're willing to speak candidly. Most official statements from SR personnel emphasize that wilderness is dangerous and people get lost. But speak to SAR veterans off the record, and you hear different stories. Experiences that don't fit normal patterns. Cases that defy explanation. Patterns they've noticed but don't discuss publicly. One SAR veteran with over 30 years of experience said in an anonymous interview, "I've seen things in my career that I can't explain and that I don't talk about publicly because I'd be laughed at. Searches where the dogs won't work, and we don't know why. Bodies appearing in places we searched multiple times. Cases where nothing about the disappearance or discovery makes sense. There are patterns, and those of us who've done this long enough recognize them. But we don't talk about it. Because what do you say? That there's something in the wilderness taking people? That sounds insane. So we focus on the cases we can explain and try not to think too hard about the ones we can't." Another longtime SAR member described specific strange experiences. "I've been on searches where I felt watched, where the forest felt wrong in a way I can't describe, where other searchers felt the same thing and we'd quietly discuss it but never include it in reports. I've had my dog refuse to search areas for no apparent reason. I've found evidence in locations we'd already cleared. I've seen enough that I won't go into certain areas anymore, even though I can't articulate why they feel dangerous." These candid admissions from experienced professionals lend credibility to the idea that something genuinely strange is happening. These aren't civilians prone to panic or imagination. These are trained professionals with years or decades of experience. If they're seeing patterns and having experiences they can't explain, that's significant. The reluctance to speak publicly is understandable. Professional reputation matters, and claims of unexplained phenomena damage credibility. But the private acknowledgement from SAR community that these cases are genuinely strange and troubling is important. Let's talk about predation theories. Some researchers have proposed that these disappearances are due to unknown predators. Not bears or mountain lions, which are known and leave evidence, but something else that lives in wilderness areas. Undiscovered primates like Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Unknown predators that are intelligent enough to avoid detection. Something that has learned to hunt humans specifically. This theory is controversial, and many dismiss it, but it would explain some patterns. People being carried long distances, accounting for lack of scent trails and impossible distances. Victims being found without shoes, if the predator removes them for some reason. The targeting of vulnerable individuals, children, elderly, those with disabilities. The cluster areas where disappearances concentrate, if predators have territories. The reluctance of authorities to acknowledge patterns, if they suspect something but can't prove it or don't want to cause panic. One primatologist who studied Sasquatch reports said, "I don't know if Bigfoot exists, but if something like it does exist, it would be a predator in wilderness areas, and humans would be potential prey, especially vulnerable humans like children or elderly." The patterns of some missing 411 cases are consistent with predation by an intelligent unknown predator. That doesn't prove such a predator exists, but it's a hypothesis that fits some evidence. The predation theory is speculative but can't be dismissed out of hand. Something is happening to people in wilderness areas. If natural causes and human foul play don't fully explain the patterns, what's left? Unknown predators are at least a testable hypothesis, even if proving or disproving it is difficult. Let's discuss portal or dimensional theories. These are the most speculative explanations but are mentioned frequently in discussions of these cases. The theory is that certain locations have properties allowing transfer to other dimensions or realities. People who disappear are somehow shifted dimensionally and may or may not return. This would explain the complete lack of traces when people disappear. The strange stories from child survivors about weird places. The time distortion reported by some survivors. Bodies appearing in previously searched areas if they return from elsewhere. The clustering in specific geographic locations if portals are fixed to certain places. This theory sounds like science fiction. But it's proposed by some researchers because conventional explanations fail so completely in these cases. One physicist who studied anomalous disappearances said, "I'm not claiming portals to other dimensions exist, but quantum mechanics tells us reality is stranger than common sense suggests. Multiple dimensions, parallel realities, these are serious scientific concepts, even if we can't prove they're real or accessible." If something like dimensional portals existed in specific locations, the patterns of missing 411 cases might be what we'd expect to see. People vanishing completely, appearing in impossible locations, experiencing time strangely. I'm not endorsing this explanation, but I'm saying it's not as absurd as it initially sounds. The portal theory is the most speculative explanation offered. But the strangeness of these cases pushes people towards speculative theories because conventional explanations are so inadequate. Now let's talk about government knowledge and possible cover-ups. Some researchers believe that government agencies know more about these disappearances than they're revealing, that there have been investigations and studies that aren't public. That evidence exists, that's being suppressed. Why would government cover up information about wilderness disappearances? Theories range from mundane to conspiratorial. Mundane explanation, they're covering up their own incompetence or liability. If they acknowledge patterns they should have addressed, they open themselves to lawsuits. More concerning explanation, they know something disturbing and are hiding it to prevent panic. If there's a genuine threat in wilderness areas, revealing it could destroy tourism and outdoor recreation industries. Conspiratorial explanation, they're involved somehow or are protecting something. Perhaps military experiments gone wrong, perhaps cooperation with non-human entities, perhaps something else. Most people dismiss conspiracy theories. But the reluctance of agencies to share information, the defensiveness when questioned, the apparent stonewalling of researchers, does create suspicion. One former federal employee said anonymously, "I worked for an agency that manages public lands. I saw internal documents about disappearances that never became public. Not everything is available through FOIA requests because a lot is classified for securities reasons that are vague. I can't say definitively that there's a cover-up, but I can say there's information the public doesn't have access to. Why it's being withheld, I don't know. But the public picture of these cases is incomplete. Whether there's an actual cover-up or just bureaucratic secrecy and liability concerns is unknown. But families of missing people deserve transparency and full information. The lack of openness from authorities fuels speculation and conspiracy theories. Let's discuss the psychological impact of these cases on families. Losing a loved one to unexplained disappearance in wilderness is traumatic in unique ways. No closure, no understanding of what happened, no body to bury in many cases. Families are left with questions that haunt them forever. Where is their loved one? What happened in those final moments? Did they suffer? Are they still out there somehow? The strangeness of these cases adds additional pain. When told their child couldn't have traveled the distance where they were found. When hearing that search dogs mysteriously couldn't track. When learning that areas were searched multiple times before the body appeared. Families are left feeling that something is being hidden from them or that they'll never understand what happened. One mother whose child disappeared and was later found in impossible circumstances said, "I lost my daughter, and I'll never truly know what happened to her." The official explanation doesn't make sense. She couldn't have gotten where they found her on her own. Something happened that nobody will explain or that they can't explain. I'm grateful we found her so I could bury her, but I'll never have peace because I'll never understand what took her from us. The psychological toll extends to survivors of similar experiences. People who have been lost in wilderness and experienced strange events. Children who survive disappearances with memories of impossible things. These individuals often struggle with trauma, compounded by not being believed. One survivor who was lost as a child said, "I know what happened to me sounds crazy. For years I didn't talk about it because adults told me I was confused or making it up. But I know what I experienced. I was taken somewhere that wasn't normal forest. Someone or something kept me there. Then I was returned. It's real, but nobody believes it. That's almost worse than the experience itself, knowing nobody will believe what you survived." Now let's talk about prevention. If these disappearances follow patterns, can they be prevented? Some recommendations from researchers. Never go into wilderness alone. Maintain visual contact with group members at all times. Don't follow unexpected voices or calls that might not be real. Don't investigate sounds of distress unless you verify they're real. Avoid straying from established trails. Teach children to stay with adults and not follow anyone or anything away from group. Trust instincts if an area feels wrong or dangerous. Carry and know how to use emergency locator beacons, though recognize they may not work in all situations. Inform others of exact plans and expected return time. Recognize cluster areas where disappearances are more common and exercise extra caution there. These are basic wilderness safety recommendations, but they're particularly important given the patterns in these cases. One SAR professional said, most of what prevents these disappearances is basic awareness and staying together. The majority of strange disappearances involve people who separated from their group, or who were briefly out of sight. Maintaining visual contact dramatically reduces risk. It won't eliminate all danger, but it helps. But even following all precautions doesn't guarantee safety. Some of these disappearances have happened despite people being careful. The best advice might be, respect the wilderness, recognize you're not the apex predator, and understand that there are things in wild places that we don't fully comprehend. As we move toward the conclusion of this exploration, let's reflect on what these cases tell us. They tell us that wilderness is more mysterious and dangerous than we'd like to believe. They tell us that there are phenomena occurring that we can't adequately explain with current knowledge. They tell us that patterns exist, that suggest something systematic rather than random. They tell us that authorities are reluctant to acknowledge these patterns, whether from ignorance, fear of liability, or something more concerning. They tell us that people have been vanishing under strange circumstances for a very long time and probably will continue to do so. And they tell us that perhaps our ancestors were wiser than we credit when they told stories about dangerous things in the forests. Modern society has become disconnected from wilderness. We treat it as a playground, a resource, a backdrop for recreation. We've forgotten that it's genuinely wild, genuinely dangerous, and that we're visitors in places that don't belong to us. Perhaps these disappearances are reminders. Reminders that we're not as safe as we think. Reminders that we're not as in control as we believe. Reminders that there are places and things that don't answer to human authority. But let's continue deeper into these cases, because we've only scratched the surface of how disturbing and mysterious these disappearances truly are. Let's talk about cases involving experienced outdoors people, hunters, and wilderness professionals who should know better than anyone how to survive. These cases are particularly troubling because they involve people with extensive training and experience. People who shouldn't get lost, shouldn't make basic mistakes, shouldn't vanish without a trace. In October 1999, Stephen Kubacki was cross-country skiing on the frozen Lake Michigan shoreline. Stephen was an experienced skier, familiar with winter conditions, properly equipped. He simply vanished. Search efforts found his ski equipment and backpack near the shore, but no sign of Stephen. Then 15 months later, Stephen woke up in a field in Massachusetts, over 700 miles from where he disappeared. He was wearing clothes that weren't his, had a light growth of beard suggesting only days had passed, and had no memory of the intervening 15 months. Stephen's case is one of the most bizarre in the missing 411 files. How does someone disappear from Michigan, lose 15 months of time, and wake up in Massachusetts with no memory? Medical and psychological evaluation found Stephen to be mentally healthy, not suffering from fugue states or dissociative disorders. He genuinely had no memory of where he'd been or what happened during those 15 months. Stephen's case suggests something beyond normal disappearance and disorientation. The time loss, the impossible distance, the complete memory gap all point to something that defies conventional explanation. One psychologist who evaluated Stephen said, "I've worked with amnesia cases, with dissociative disorders, with all kinds of memory issues. Stephen doesn't fit any normal pattern. The time loss is too complete, too clean. People with dissociative fugue usually have fragments of memory, traces of what happened. Stephen has nothing. It's as if those 15 months were erased, and he's disturbed by this, which rules out malingering. He wants to know what happened to him, and is frustrated that he can't remember." Now let's discuss cases where multiple people witness something strange before or during a disappearance. These cases are significant because they involve corroborating witnesses who can't all be mistaken or lying. In August 2008, a group of hikers in Olympic National Park in Washington witnessed something that still haunts them. They were hiking a popular trail when they heard screams coming from the forest off the trail. Not animal screams, human screams, clearly distress calls. The group debated whether to investigate or get help. Before they could decide, a figure ran across the trail ahead of them. The figure was human-shaped but moved in a way that seemed wrong. Too fast, too agile, moving through dense undergrowth that should have slowed anyone down. The screams stopped abruptly. The group hurried out and reported what they'd seen to rangers. Rangers searched the area but found nothing. No missing person reports, no evidence of anyone being in distress. But 3 members of that hiking group saw the same thing and heard the same screams. They weren't mistaken or imagining things. Something happened in that forest, something involving human-sounding screams and a figure that moved in ways that troubled experienced hikers. One member of that group said, "I've hiked all my life. I know how people move through forest. That thing, whatever it was, moved wrong. Too fast, too smooth through terrain. that would slow anyone down. And those screams, I'll never forget them. They were terror, pure terror. Then silence. Whatever happened to whoever was screaming, it happened quickly. We reported it, but I don't think anyone took it seriously. But I know what I heard and saw. Group witness cases are particularly valuable because they eliminate the possibility of individual error or fabrication. When multiple trained observers report the same thing, it deserves serious attention. Let's talk about cases involving children who display knowledge or abilities they shouldn't have after being found. These cases suggest that something happens to these children during their missing time that we don't understand. In June 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Larry Jeffrey disappeared while on a camping trip with his family in the Olympic National Forest. Larry was playing near the campsite when he vanished. Massive searches covered the area for days. Larry was found alive 5 days later, approximately 19 miles from the campsite. For a 6-year-old to travel 19 miles through mountainous wilderness in 5 days is remarkable enough. But what troubled rescuers was Larry's condition and behavior. He was dirty and hungry, but not severely dehydrated or injured. More disturbing, Larry seemed to know the terrain. When searchers asked how he'd survived, Larry described traveling through the forest with confidence. He knew where to find water, where to shelter, how to avoid getting more lost. This knowledge shouldn't have existed in a 6-year-old urban child with no wilderness experience. Larry also demonstrated navigation skills, pointing out directions and landmarks with accuracy that surprised searchers. One searcher said Larry behaved like someone who'd been trained in wilderness survival, but he was 6 and had no training. He knew things he shouldn't know, where water was, how to read terrain, how to move through forest efficiently. When we asked how he knew these things, he couldn't explain. He just knew. That's not normal for a lost 6-year-old. Several cases involve children displaying similar unexplained knowledge after being found. Children who suddenly know plant names they'd never been taught. Children who demonstrate navigation abilities beyond their age and experience. Children who seem to understand the forest in ways they couldn't have learned. Are these children taught during their missing time? Is something about the experience imprinting knowledge directly into their minds? This pattern suggests something interactive happening during disappearances, not just passive events. Now let's discuss cases where electronics malfunction in specific ways that seem almost purposeful. We've mentioned technology failures generally, but some cases show patterns that suggest deliberate interference. In July 2015, a hiker named Jake was trekking in the Cascade Mountains using GPS and his smartphone for navigation. Jake was experienced with technology and checked his devices regularly. Around midday, both his GPS unit and smartphone began showing impossible readings. A GPS showed him moving at speeds that would require a vehicle, placing him in locations he knew he wasn't. His smartphone compass spun wildly, showing all directions as north simultaneously. Jake tried to troubleshoot, thinking it was a technical glitch, but both devices continued malfunctioning in ways that seemed coordinated, as if something was deliberately jamming or spoofing his navigation technology. Jake became disoriented, not trusting his devices, but also not trusting his own sense of direction after the conflicting information. He activated his emergency beacon, which fortunately worked. Rescue helicopter found him several hours later. When his devices were examined later, they functioned perfectly. Technicians found no explanation for the malfunction Jake experienced. Jake said, both devices failing simultaneously in ways that disrupted navigation specifically, not just failing completely, but giving false information that made me distrust my own judgment. That seems purposeful, like something wanted me disoriented and lost. It was trying to separate me from my ability to navigate. If I hadn't had the emergency beacon, I would have been in serious trouble. The pattern of technology failing specifically in ways that make people more lost and vulnerable appears in multiple cases. Not complete failure, which people recognize and adapt to, but partial failure or false information that creates confusion and doubt. This suggests something sophisticated about whatever causes these incidents. Let's talk about cases involving people who disappeared while photographing or filming in wilderness areas. Several cases involve people with cameras who vanish, and their cameras, if found, contain disturbing final images. In September 2013, a nature photographer named Marcus was shooting landscapes in the Great Smoky Mountains. Marcus was experienced, careful, and maintained contact with his partner via radio. During one radio check, Marcus said he'd seen something interesting and was going to photograph it. He didn't specify what it was, but sounded excited, not alarmed. That was the last communication from Marcus. Search and rescue efforts found Marcus's body a week later in a ravine several miles from where he'd been working. His camera was found nearby, damaged, but with memory card intact. When the photos were reviewed, they showed Marcus's normal landscape work. Then a series of photos that made no sense. Blurred images that looked like they were taken while moving rapidly. Shots of forest canopy from impossible angles, as if the camera was high above ground. Final images that were too dark and blurred to interpret. One photo appeared to show Marcus himself, taken from an angle suggesting someone else had the camera. But no one else should have been there. Photo analysis suggested the images were genuine, not manipulated. But they didn't make sense with any normal sequence of events. One forensic photo analyst said the progression of Marcus's final photos is disturbing. Normal shots, then suddenly the camera is moving fast. Then it's up high, then it's taking photos of Marcus himself. Either someone took his camera, which raises questions about who and why, or something picked up Marcus while he was holding the camera, which doesn't make sense at all. The photos document something happening, but what that something was is unclear. Camera evidence is both valuable and disturbing in these cases. It provides objective data, but that data often raises more questions than it answers. Let's discuss cases where people are found in positions that suggest they were placed rather than falling or dying naturally. Bodies found in poses that don't match the circumstances. Positioned in ways that seem deliberate or ritualistic. In April 2014, a hiker named Daniel was found deceased in Rocky Mountain National Park. Daniel had been missing for 3 days before his body was discovered. The location wasn't particularly dangerous, not a cliff or other hazard. But Daniel's body was positioned in a way that struck searchers as odd. He was lying on his back, arms crossed over his chest, eyes closed. The position looked peaceful, almost like someone had laid him out for burial. This wouldn't be remarkable, except that the circumstances of his death suggested he died from exposure while disoriented. People dying from exposure don't arrange themselves neatly with arms crossed. They typically curl into fetal positions, seeking warmth. Medical examination found no evidence that Daniel had been moved after death. No drag marks, no sign someone had repositioned his body. He died in that position. But why would someone dying from exposure lie on their back with arms crossed in a peaceful pose? One medical examiner said, the position of Daniel's body is inconsistent with how people die from exposure in wilderness. It looks posed, arranged, but evidence suggests he died where and how we found him. He wasn't moved post-mortem, which means he positioned himself that way before dying. Why? Was he accepting death and chose a peaceful position? Was he in an altered state of consciousness that made him arrange himself that way? We don't know. The posed body's pattern appears in multiple cases. People found in positions that seem intentional rather than natural. Bodies that appear to have been arranged. This pattern suggests consciousness and intention even in the final moments, but intention that doesn't match normal survival behaviors. Now let's talk about cases involving Native American reservations and tribal lands. Several significant disappearances have occurred on or near reservation lands, and tribal members sometimes have perspectives on these cases that differ from official explanations. In August 2016, a young woman named Ashley Loring Heavy Runner disappeared from the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. Ashley was 20 and living on the reservation with her family. She was last seen at her sister's apartment and seemed to simply vanish. Despite being a missing person case on a reservation, the response from authorities was minimal. Tribal police were understaffed and under-resourced. Federal agencies were slow to respond or assist. Ashley's family conducted their own searches, with help from community members. What they found troubled them. Several community members reported seeing Ashley in the days after she supposedly disappeared. But when approached, she seemed confused, disoriented, not recognizing people she should know. Then these sightings stopped. Ashley's case remains unsolved, but her family believes something took her. Not human traffickers or typical foul play, but something connected to the land itself. Tribal elders shared stories about areas where people vanish, about spirits that take people, about old ways of protection that aren't practiced anymore. Ashley's sister said, "The police don't understand. They think this is a runaway or trafficking case, but our elders know differently. There are things on this land, old things, that can take people." Ashley encountered something. The way she was acting when people saw her those few days. That wasn't her. Something had her. Then it took her completely. Our people have stories about this. Warnings, but nobody listens to tribal knowledge. The epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is well documented. But some of these cases, like Ashley's, have elements that don't fit human perpetrators. The strange sightings, the disorientation, the complete vanishing. These elements appear in missing 411 cases and suggest overlap between these distinct types of disappearances. Tribal communities often have explanations that modern society dismisses. But those explanations come from deep knowledge of the land and centuries of experience. Ignoring or dismissing them is a mistake. Let's discuss cases where rescuers find evidence that someone was caring for the missing person. These cases are strange because they suggest a third-party involvement, but a third party that helps rather than harms. In May 2017, a 3-year-old boy named Casey Hathaway disappeared from his grandmother's backyard in North Carolina. The backyard bordered on woods, and Casey was playing with cousins. He was only out of adult sight for a few minutes before he was noticed missing. Massive search operations covered the woods for days in harsh winter conditions. Casey was found 3 days later, cold and wet but alive. When asked how he survived, Casey told a consistent story. A bear kept him safe. The bear stayed with him, kept him warm, protected him from danger. At first, adults thought Casey meant a stuffed bear, or was confused. But Casey insisted it was a real bear that took care of him. And here's what's interesting. Casey's description of where he'd been and what happened was more detailed than a 3-year-old's imagination typically produces. He described specific locations, events, and interactions with the bear in consistent detail across multiple retellings. One child psychologist who evaluated Casey said, "Casey's account is remarkably consistent and detailed for a 3-year-old. Usually children that age have fragmented memories and their stories change with retelling. Casey's story has remained stable, and he provides details that suggest real experience rather than imagination. Whether he actually experienced what he describes or his mind created a detailed narrative to process trauma, we can't determine. But something kept that child alive in conditions that should have been fatal." The helpful entity pattern appears in multiple cases, with young children. Bears, people, angels, or other beings that supposedly care for the child during their time missing. Are these real experiences or psychological mechanisms for coping with trauma? Children surviving in conditions that should kill them suggests something is helping them. Whether that help is physical or psychological or something else is the question. Now let's talk about cases where weather conditions during searches create patterns that seem statistically unlikely to be coincidence. We've mentioned weather generally, but let's look at specific examples. In June 2015, a hiker disappeared in the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming. Weather at the time of disappearance was clear and mild. Perfect conditions for searching. Within hours of the search beginning, an unexpected storm system moved in. The storm was localized, affecting only the search area and immediate surroundings. Meteorologists called it unusual, as weather patterns didn't suggest such a storm. The storm lasted 3 days, creating conditions that made searching difficult and dangerous. When the storm cleared, the search resumed, but any traces were gone. The hiker's body was eventually found, but much later and in a location that raised questions. Meteorologists reviewing the storm said it was anomalous, appearing suddenly without the typical precursor conditions. One meteorologist said, "The storm that affected that search was unusual in several ways. It appeared with little warning, was highly localized, persisted longer than conditions suggested it would, then dissipated quickly." Weather can be unpredictable, but this storm's timing and characteristics were odd enough to be notable. When you compile dozens of cases and find that unexpected weather hampers a disproportionate number of searches, the pattern becomes concerning. Either it's remarkable coincidence, or there's some connection between these disappearances and weather phenomena. Some researchers have proposed that whatever causes these disappearances might also influence weather, using storms to cover traces and hamper rescue efforts. This sounds far-fetched until you see how consistently it happens. Let's discuss cases involving people who displayed unusual behavior before disappearing. Behavior changes that troubled those around them but weren't severe enough to intervene. In July 2013, a man named Robert was on a camping trip with friends in Oregon. Robert was normally social and engaged. But during this trip, friends noticed he became withdrawn and seemed preoccupied. He would stare into the forest for long periods. He made comments about hearing things, feeling watched. Friends thought he was tired or stressed, but didn't think it was serious. On the final day, Robert said he needed to check something in the woods. He walked into the forest and never came back. Search efforts found no trace of Robert. His friends deeply regret not taking his strange behavior more seriously. One friend said Robert was acting odd for a day or two before he disappeared, distracted, talking about hearing things. We joked about it, thought he was being weird. We didn't realize something was actually wrong. Then he just walked into the woods like he was being called. I think something was communicating with him, drawing him in, and we didn't recognize it until it was too late. The behavioral changes before disappearance appear in several cases. People becoming withdrawn, distracted, reporting sensory experiences. Others don't share, as if they're perceiving something that's preparing to take them. This pattern suggests these disappearances aren't entirely random. There may be a process leading up to them, a period where the person is being influenced or prepared. If loved ones recognize this pattern, could interventions prevent some disappearances? Now let's talk about cases that involve people vanishing from their tents during overnight camping. These cases are particularly disturbing because tents provide shelter and people inside should be safe. In September 2010, a couple camping in the Ozarks experienced something that still terrifies them. They'd set up camp, had dinner, and retired to their tent for the night. Both fell asleep without incident. Around 2 a.m., the woman woke to find her partner gone. She assumed he'd gone to use the bathroom outside. She waited, but he didn't return. After 10 minutes, she became concerned and went outside. He wasn't near the tent. She called for him, increasingly panicked. No response. She woke nearby campers who helped search. Her partner was found 3 hours later, over 2 miles from the campsite. He was disoriented, confused, couldn't explain how he got there. He had vague memories of waking up, feeling compelled to leave the tent, and walking. But the memory was dreamlike, not clear. He couldn't explain why he left the tent in the middle of the night, or where he thought he was going. The woman said, "He left the tent while I was sleeping right next to him, walked 2 miles through forest in the dark, and doesn't remember why. He wasn't sleepwalking, he has no history of that. Something made him leave. And if I hadn't woken up when I did, if we hadn't found him, he could have kept walking until he was lost permanently. That terrifies me." Tent disappearances suggest people can be influenced even in the supposed safety of shelter. That whatever causes these incidents can compel people to leave safety and walk into danger. The victims often have little or no memory of why they left, suggesting altered consciousness or external influence. Let's discuss cases where tracking dogs not only fail to track but show fear or distress. Dog behavior is one of the most consistent and troubling patterns in these cases. In August 2018, search dogs were brought in to find a missing child in Montana. The dogs were experienced, had successful records in previous searches. When deployed in the area where the child disappeared, the dogs behaved in ways their handlers had never seen. One dog whined continuously and tried to return to the vehicle. Another dog tracked briefly, then stopped and refused to continue, showing signs of extreme stress. A third dog tracked to a specific location, then barked aggressively at empty forest as if something was there. Handlers couldn't get the dogs to work effectively. One handler said, "My dog has never done this. She's fearless usually, goes anywhere. But in that search area, she was terrified. She tracked for a bit, then stopped and refused to go further, like there was an invisible barrier she wouldn't cross. And at one point, she barked and growled at nothing visible. Whatever she was sensing, it frightened her. I've never seen her that scared." The fact that multiple trained dogs respond with fear in these situations suggests they're perceiving something humans don't. Dogs have sensory capabilities beyond human, detecting sounds and smells we can't. Are they detecting whatever is responsible for these disappearances? Is that why they can't track? Because the scent trail is disrupted or contaminated by something else they fear. Dog handlers take their animals' behavior seriously because the dogs are usually reliable. When dogs refuse to work or show fear, handlers know something is wrong even if they can't determine what. Now let's talk about cases involving experienced trackers who find signs that don't make sense. Trackers can read a story in footprints, broken vegetation, disturbed ground. But in some of these cases, what trackers find defies their understanding. In October 2017, a tracker was brought in to help search for a missing hiker in Colorado. The tracker found footprints from the missing person leaving the trail. The prints were clear initially, normal walking gait. Then the prints changed. They became further apart, as if the person was suddenly taking longer strides, much longer strides than should be possible. Then the prints stopped completely in an area with no explanation for their cessation. No water that would eliminate tracks, no rock that wouldn't show marks, just soft ground where tracks should continue, but don't. The tracker said, the stride length increased beyond what's human normal. It's like the person was suddenly walking with 8-foot strides, which isn't possible. Then the tracks just stop, not fade out gradually, not change direction, just stop. Like the person was lifted off the ground, mid-step. I've been tracking for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. Tracks that display impossible characteristics or that end without explanation appear in multiple cases. Trackers finding evidence that contradicts what they know about how people move and leave signs. This physical evidence suggests something genuinely anomalous is happening. Not mass hallucination or misinterpretation, but trackable physical evidence that defies explanation. Let's discuss cases where the missing person's belongings are found arranged in strange ways. Items that appear to be deliberately placed or organized rather than randomly dropped. In June 2019, a hiker's backpack was found in Yosemite. The backpack belonged to a woman who'd been missing for a week. The backpack was found on a boulder in a stream, positioned carefully. When opened, the contents were arranged neatly. Items organized by type, clothing folded, everything placed methodically. This is not how someone in distress abandons a backpack. This is intentional organization. The missing woman was never found, but her backpack suggests someone took time to organize her belongings and place them for discovery. Who would do this, and why? If the woman herself did it, why would someone in distress stop to organize their backpack before continuing? If someone else did it, who and for what purpose? One investigator said, "The arranged backpack is disturbing. It shows intention and time. Someone or something organized those belongings and positioned that backpack. It wasn't dropped or discarded. It was placed. That's a message or a marker, but we don't know what it means." Arranged belongings appear in several cases, suggesting ritualistic or communicative intent, as if whatever is responsible for these disappearances is leading signs deliberately. Now let's talk about cases involving children who describe being kept or held during their missing time. These accounts are rare and deeply disturbing. Most children who survive have no memory or only vague impressions, but a few have described experiences, suggesting they were held captive by something. A young girl who disappeared in 2012 and was found after 3 days told investigators about being in a dark place. She described being unable to leave, though she couldn't explain what prevented her. She said there were others there, but she couldn't see them clearly. She heard voices but couldn't understand the words. Then suddenly she was outside again, found by searchers. Psychologists evaluated her and found no evidence she was coached or fabricating. Her distress was genuine, and her account remained consistent. But what she described doesn't match being lost in wilderness. It sounds like being held in an enclosed space, but no such space was found in the search area. One psychologist said, "This child describes an experience of confinement, but physical search found no structures, caves, or places where she could have been confined. Either she experienced this, in a psychological sense, her mind creating a metaphor for being lost and afraid, or something happened to her that we don't have a framework to understand. The terror in her account is real. She experienced something that genuinely frightened her." These accounts of being held or kept raise the most disturbing questions. If children are being held somewhere during their missing time, where? Are they being held in physical locations that searchers miss? Are they being held in some state that makes them undetectable? The implications are horrifying and we have no good answers. Let's discuss the pattern of missing people being found near or in water, even when they had to travel significant distances to reach it. This pattern has been noted by multiple researchers and appears far too often to be coincidence. A person disappears from a location with no nearby water. When found, they're in or near a creek, stream, lake, or river, often miles from where they disappeared. In July 2020, a hiker disappeared in an arid area of Arizona. No significant water sources for miles. The hiker was found 3 days later in a dry wash that only had water during rare flash floods. The hiker had drowned in about a foot of water. But it hadn't rained in that area. How was there water in the wash? And why was the hiker there, miles from the trail and the direction they should have been traveling? Investigators determined that there had been a brief, highly localized storm that created temporary water in that specific wash. The hiker had somehow traveled miles to reach that exact location precisely when it had water. The timing seemed impossibly specific. One investigator said, "The chances of him being at that exact spot at the exact time water was there are astronomical. It's like he was directed there specifically to drown, or something wanted him in water and created conditions for that." I know that sounds crazy, but the coincidence required for this to happen naturally is extreme. The water connection in these cases might be the most significant pattern. Why water? Does water have properties relevant to these disappearances? Is water used as a disposal method? Does whatever causes these incidents associate with water in some way? The consistency of this pattern demands explanation that we don't currently have. Now let's talk about cases where the missing person's last communication was strange or cryptic. Messages that in hindsight suggest something was wrong but weren't recognized as distress calls at the time. In September 2018, a woman named Sarah was hiking alone in Vermont. She had been checking in regularly via text with her partner. Her final text was, "The birds stopped singing. Something feels wrong." Then, no more communication. Search and rescue found Sarah's body a week later. She had died from exposure, but the location where she was found and the circumstances raised questions. Sarah was experienced, had proper equipment, should have been able to survive. Her final text suggests she sensed danger, but what danger? Birds going quiet is a natural phenomenon that can indicate predators. But what predator would cause an experienced hiker to become so disoriented she died from exposure? Sarah's partner said, "That final text haunts me." She knew something was wrong. The birds stopping probably meant something was there, something that scared the wildlife. But what? And why did she become so lost and disoriented that she couldn't survive? Sarah knew wilderness survival. Something happened to her that she couldn't overcome. Final communications in these cases sometimes contain clues that we only recognize in retrospect. People sensing something wrong, but not articulating it clearly. Messages that suggest altered mental states, or growing disorientation. Last communications that indicate awareness of danger, but inability to identify or escape it. Let's discuss the phenomenon of missing people being found without crucial survival gear. Not just shoes, but items they would have needed desperately. Coats missing in cold weather. Water bottles discarded when dying of thirst. Emergency supplies abandoned for no apparent reason. In April 2019, a hiker was found deceased in Washington state. He had died from hypothermia despite having a warm coat in his backpack. The coat was neatly folded, unused, while he died from cold. This is paradoxical undressing taken further, not just removing clothes but failing to use available protection. Why wouldn't someone dying from cold use the coat they were carrying? Unless they were in such an altered state that they couldn't recognize their need or access their resources. Medical examination found no drugs or alcohol that would explain impaired judgment. The hiker was healthy, experienced, should have been able to make rational survival decisions. One wilderness survival expert said, not using available gear suggests severe cognitive impairment, but we found no physical cause for such impairment. This person should have been able to recognize they needed warmth and access the coat in their backpack. The failure to do so suggests something profoundly wrong with their mental state, but what caused that state is unclear. The pattern of having necessary survival gear but not using it appears in multiple cases. It suggests that whatever happens to these people affects their judgment and ability to take basic survival actions. They're conscious and mobile enough to travel significant distances, but they're impaired enough that they can't or won't use resources that would save their lives. This specific combination of capabilities and impairments is difficult to explain. Now let's talk about cases where searchers experience strange phenomena during the search itself. Experiences that make them question what they're dealing with. In July 2016, searchers looking for a missing child in the Smoky Mountains reported unusual experiences. Multiple searchers reported hearing a child crying in the distance. They would follow the sound, but it would always stay ahead of them, never getting closer. The crying would move in ways that didn't match how a child would move through that terrain. Impossibly fast, changing direction instantly, appearing in locations the child couldn't have reached. Eventually, searchers realized they were being led in circles or away from productive search areas. The crying sound stopped when searchers ignored them and continued systematic searching. The child was eventually found, but not in any direction the crying sounds had come from. One searcher said that crying was like luring us away from where we needed to be, like something was trying to disrupt the search. Multiple searchers heard it independently before we communicated about it, so it wasn't suggestion. Something was making those sounds, but it wasn't the child we were searching for. Searchers being misled or disrupted by strange phenomena during searches is not uncommon in these cases. Voices calling in the wrong directions. Sounds that lead searchers away from productive areas. Experiences that waste time and resources on false leads. If these phenomena are natural, they're remarkably consistent in misleading searchers. If they're not natural, the implications are disturbing. Let's discuss cases where multiple people disappear from the same location over time. Specific trailheads, campsites, or areas where repeated disappearances occur. Devil's Head Fire Lookout area in Colorado has seen multiple strange disappearances. At least 4 people have vanished in that area under unusual circumstances. Not over centuries, but within a few decades. Each case has elements that don't make sense. Experienced hikers getting lost on marked trails. People vanishing despite being with groups. Bodies found in locations that required impossible travel. Local outdoor enthusiasts avoid that area now. Too many incidents, too many strange stories, too much bad energy, as some describe it. One local hiker said, Devil's Head has a reputation for a reason. People disappear there, people have weird experiences there, people feel watched and uncomfortable there. I won't hike there anymore, even though it's beautiful. It's not worth the risk. Whatever is wrong with that area, it's been wrong for a long time. Identifying specific locations with multiple incidents should trigger investigations into what those locations have in common. But such investigations are rare, or the results aren't made public. Are there geographic or geologic features that predispose areas to these events? Are there environmental factors we're not measuring? Or is something specifically inhabiting these locations, making them dangerous? We need to study these cluster locations more carefully to understand what makes them different. Now let's talk about the emotional and psychological toll on search and rescue personnel. People who work these cases carry trauma from what they've seen and experienced. SIRE workers are trained to handle stress and tragedy. But the missing 411 cases affect them differently. The strangeness, the lack of resolution, the patterns they notice but can't explain. These cases stay with them in ways normal searches don't. One SAR veteran said, "I've recovered bodies, I've delivered bad news to families, I've worked searches that ended tragically, that's all part of the job, and I've learned to process it. But the weird cases, the ones that don't make sense, those haunt me. I dream about them. I think about them when I'm trying to sleep, because I don't understand what happened, and that lack of understanding, that uncertainty, is harder to process than tragedy that makes sense." SIRE personnel often can't talk about their experiences because they're not believed or taken seriously. So they carry the burden silently, knowing that something strange is happening but having no outlet to discuss it. This isolation and inability to process experiences with peers adds to the psychological toll. Some SIRE workers have left the field because of these cases, unable to continue participating in searches that sometimes feel futile or dangerous, recognizing that whatever they're dealing with is beyond their training and capabilities. One former SCR worker explained their decision to leave. "After working several of these strange cases, I realized I wasn't actually helping. We search, we find nothing, or find things that don't make sense. We never get answers. It's emotionally exhausting and psychologically damaging. And I started feeling like I was putting myself in danger from whatever is causing these cases. I had to leave for my own mental health." The impact on SIRE personnel is an under-recognized aspect of these cases. These professionals deserve support and validation of their experiences. As we approach the conclusion of this extensive exploration, let's reflect on what all of these cases collectively tell us. They tell us that wilderness disappearances are more complex than simple cases of people getting lost. They tell us that patterns exist across cases that defy conventional explanation. They tell us that something is happening in forests and wilderness areas that we don't understand. They tell us that our ancestors' warnings about dangerous things in wild places might have been based on real observations, not superstition. They tell us that modern society's disconnection from wilderness has made us forget important wisdom about respecting and fearing wild places. They tell us that authorities are reluctant to acknowledge these patterns, whether from ignorance or intent. They tell us that families of missing people are left with questions that haunt them forever. They tell us that survivors sometimes carry experiences that no one believes or understands. They tell us that search and rescue professionals see things that trouble them deeply. And they tell us that the wilderness is not a safe playground for human recreation, but a genuinely wild and mysterious place where things happen that we can't control or explain. The forests are ancient. They predate human civilization by millions of years. They contain ecosystems and dynamics we've barely begun to understand. They're home to life forms we haven't fully cataloged. And perhaps they contain things we haven't recognized at all. Things that interact with humans who enter their domain. Things that take some people and leave others. Things that follow patterns we're only beginning to perceive. Whether those things are predators, phenomena, dimensional anomalies, or something else entirely remains unknown. But the evidence of their existence in the patterns of disappearances is compelling. Sleep now with the knowledge that forests are not empty. That wilderness contains mysteries we haven't solved. That people who enter wild places sometimes encounter things that are beyond explanation. And that if you choose to hike, camp, or explore wilderness, you're entering territory that isn't entirely yours. Territory that has its own residents, its own rules, its own dangers. Respect that. Prepare appropriately. Never go alone. Stay together. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. Don't follow voices or sounds that seem odd. Don't investigate strange phenomena by yourself. Maintain contact with civilization. And remember that thousands of people have vanished in circumstances that we still can't explain. You don't want to become another case. Another pattern in the data. Another mystery unsolved. The woods are patient. The woods are old. The woods remember everything. And in the woods, some mysteries remain mysteries. Some disappearances remain unexplained. Some patterns remain disturbing. Let's continue deeper into the most disturbing aspects of these cases, because there are layers we haven't fully explored yet. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's physical condition, when found, doesn't match the time they were missing. Bodies that show decomposition inconsistent with known timeline. People found alive who should have died from exposure days earlier. Physical states that don't match what should have happened. In March 2011, a hunter named Michael disappeared in Montana during a winter hunting trip. Michael was experienced, properly equipped, knew the area well. He vanished while checking a ridge alone, planning to rejoin his group within hours. When he didn't return, search operations began immediately. The weather was harsh, temperatures well below freezing at night. After 5 days, searchers found Michael's body in a ravine. But the medical examination revealed something disturbing. Michael's body showed advanced decomposition that was inconsistent with 5 days in freezing temperatures. Cold preserves bodies, slowing decomposition significantly. Michael's remains showed decomposition consistent with weeks in warm conditions, not days in freezing weather. The medical examiner couldn't explain the discrepancy. Toxicology found nothing unusual. The timeline was well established by witnesses and search records. Yet the physical evidence didn't match. One pathologist reviewing the case said, "The decomposition timeline doesn't match the known facts. Bodies don't decompose that rapidly in freezing conditions. Either our timeline is wrong, which seems impossible given the documentation, or something about this case accelerated decomposition in ways we don't understand. Neither explanation is satisfying." This pattern of physical states not matching timelines appears in multiple cases. Bodies showing more or less decomposition than expected. People surviving longer than should be physiologically possible without food or water. Physical evidence that contradicts the documented timeline. These discrepancies suggest something about these cases affects the normal passage of time or biological processes. Now let's discuss cases where witnesses describe seeing the missing person after they've been confirmed dead. These accounts are disturbing and create profound questions about what's really happening. In August 2014, a woman named Jennifer disappeared while hiking in Oregon. Jennifer's body was found 3 days after she disappeared. Medical examination confirmed she'd been dead for approximately 48 hours when found. But here's what makes this case extraordinarily strange. 2 hikers reported seeing Jennifer on the trail the day after her body was found. They didn't know she was missing at the time. They passed a woman on the trail who matched Jennifer's description perfectly. She was wearing clothes matching what Jennifer had been wearing. The hikers even spoke briefly with her, commenting on the weather. The woman responded appropriately and continued hiking. When these hikers later saw news coverage of Jennifer's disappearance and death, they were shocked. The woman they passed on the trail looked exactly like Jennifer. They came forward to report this, confused and disturbed. Investigators interviewed them separately and found their accounts consistent. Both described the same woman, same clothes, same location, same time. But Jennifer had been dead for over 24 hours at that point, confirmed by medical examination. One investigator said, "We have 2 credible witnesses who interacted with someone who looked exactly like our victim, wearing her clothes, on the trail she'd been hiking, the day after she was confirmed deceased. They're not making it up, they're genuinely disturbed by this, but it's impossible. Either they saw someone who looked remarkably like Jennifer and coincidentally was wearing similar clothes in the same area, or something we don't understand is happening." Cases of people being seen after confirmed death raise the most disturbing possibilities. Doppelgangers or lookalikes in unlikely circumstances. Mistaken identity by witnesses, or something using the deceased person's appearance. None of these explanations are satisfying. The coincidence required for lookalikes is extreme. The consistency of witness accounts rules out simple mistakes, and the alternative explanations venture into territory most people aren't willing to consider. Let's talk about cases involving children who report being told or shown things during their time missing. Information that they couldn't have known otherwise. Knowledge that appears to have been taught to them by something during their disappearance. In September 2015, a 7-year-old girl named Emma disappeared during a family camping trip in Colorado. Emma was found after 2 days, cold and hungry, but otherwise unharmed. When asked about her experience, Emma told her parents things that troubled them deeply. She described being taken to a different place, where everything looked strange. She said someone taught her about plants and animals, showing her things she'd never seen before. Emma proceeded to identify plants by names her parents had never heard or use. She described animal behaviors with accuracy that surprised wildlife experts who later spoke with her. She knew the names of geological formations and could identify rocks and minerals. This knowledge didn't exist before her disappearance. Emma was a city child with no wilderness education beyond basic school lessons. Her parents confirmed she'd never been taught what she now knew. Psychologists evaluated Emma and found her account sincere and her knowledge genuine. She wasn't repeating things she'd overheard or making up stories. She possessed actual knowledge that she couldn't have acquired normally. One child psychologist said, "Emma has knowledge that's real and accurate. She can identify plants, describe animal behaviors, recognize geological features, all with accuracy that would require extensive education. But she didn't have that education before disappearing. She acquired this knowledge during those 2 days. The question is, how? Was she taught by someone in the wilderness? If so, by whom and why? Or did something happen to her that imprinted knowledge directly? Either explanation is troubling. Several cases involve children displaying knowledge they shouldn't have after being found, as if their missing time was spent being educated about the wilderness. But by whom or what? And for what purpose? This pattern suggests these disappearances aren't entirely random or predatory. There's an interactive component, an educational or communicative aspect. Children are being taught, not just taken. The implications of this are profound and disturbing. Now let's discuss cases where electronic equipment captures images or sounds that can't be explained. Trail cameras, security cameras, audio recording devices, picking up anomalies. In June 2017, a trail camera set up by hunters in Pennsylvania captured something that has never been explained. The camera was positioned to photograph wildlife passing through a specific area. It was triggered by movement and captured thousands of normal images over months. Then one sequence of images was different. The camera captured a series of photos showing what appeared to be a human figure, but the figure's proportions were wrong, too tall and oddly shaped. It moved through the frame in a way that didn't match human locomotion. The sequence showed the figure approaching the camera, examining it, then moving away. In the final clear image, the figure appeared to be looking directly at the camera. The face, if it can be called that, was wrong in ways that are difficult to describe. Human-like, but not human. The hunters who owned the camera were disturbed enough to remove it from that location. They shared the images with wildlife experts and law enforcement. No one could identify what the figure was. One wildlife biologist said, "Those images don't show any animal I'm familiar with. The proportions are wrong for a bear standing upright. The movement pattern doesn't match any known animal, and the way it examined the camera suggests intelligence and curiosity. But what it is, I can't say. It's not human, but it's not any recognized wildlife either." Trail camera anomalies appear in several cases connected to disappearance areas. Figures that don't match known wildlife. Movements captured that shouldn't be possible. Images that are there for one frame and gone the next, as if whatever was photographed can appear and vanish rapidly. This photographic evidence is valuable because it's objective data. Not eyewitness accounts that can be questioned, but actual images that can be analyzed. Yet what the images show often defies identification. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's DNA is found in locations that don't make sense. Forensic evidence placing them somewhere physically impossible. In July 2018, a hiker disappeared in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Extensive searches found no trace of the missing person for weeks. Then investigators found something strange. DNA evidence from the missing hiker was found on vegetation in 3 separate locations. These locations were all at high elevation, on cliffsides that would be extremely difficult to access. The locations formed a triangle spanning several miles. For the hiker to have been at all 3 locations would have required technical climbing equipment and significant time. The hiker was not a climber and had no such equipment. Additionally, the DNA was found in all 3 locations within a time frame that made visiting all 3 nearly impossible. The hiker would have had to cover impossible distances across dangerous terrain in very little time. One forensic investigator said, "The DNA evidence is valid. We're certain of that, but the locations and timing don't make physical sense. For this person to have been in all 3 places when the DNA suggests they would need to travel faster and more efficiently than any human could, especially without climbing gear across technical terrain. Either our timeline for the DNA deposition is wrong, or this person was moved between these locations by something capable of rapid movement across difficult terrain." The hiker's body was eventually found in a 4th location, equally inaccessible. The case remains unsolved in terms of how the hiker got to these various locations. Forensic evidence creating more questions than answers appears in multiple cases. DNA, fingerprints, or other traces found where they shouldn't be. Evidence suggesting impossible movements or presence in multiple locations simultaneously. This physical evidence is difficult to dismiss or explain away. Now let's discuss the pattern of missing people's cell phones being found with deliberately deleted data. Not corrupted data from damage, but systematic deletion as if someone accessed the phone. In May 2019, a missing hiker's phone was found near a trail in Washington. The phone had battery life remaining and was functional. But when forensic analysts examined it, they found something disturbing. Text messages had been selectively deleted. Not all messages, but specific conversations from the days leading up to the disappearance. Photos had been deleted, but again, selectively. Certain images removed while others remained. Browser history had been cleared. The pattern of deletion suggested someone had carefully removed specific information. But the missing hiker was never found, and no one else should have had access to the phone. One digital forensics expert said, "The deletion pattern is methodical, not random." Someone went through this phone and removed specific items while leaving others. The missing hiker is the obvious person who could have done this. But why? What information was being concealed? And if the hiker deleted this data themselves, it suggests premeditation or knowledge of what was coming. If someone else deleted it, who had access to the phone, and what were they hiding? Cell phones with tampered data appear in several cases. Sometimes the data deletion seems designed to remove evidence of the person's plans or mental state. Other times it seems designed to remove evidence of communications or interactions. The systematic nature of the deletion suggests purpose and intelligence. But whose purpose and whose intelligence remains unclear. Let's talk about cases where search dogs track to roads or parking areas and stop, suggesting the missing person was picked up by a vehicle. But the circumstances make vehicle involvement seem impossible. In October 2016, a child disappeared from a campground in a remote area of Montana. The child was 3 years old and had been playing near the campsite. Search dogs tracked from the campsite to a Forest Service road, about a quarter-mile away. At the road, the dogs lost the scent, indicating the child entered a vehicle. But this creates profound questions. Who would have been on that remote Forest Service road at exactly the right time? The campground had only a few families, all accounted for. No other vehicles were reported in the area by campers or rangers. The timing would have required someone to be waiting on that specific road precisely when the child wandered to it. That level of coordination suggests either remarkable coincidence or premeditation. The child was never found, despite extensive investigation into all possibilities. One investigator said the dogs are reliable. If they track to the road and indicated vehicle pickup, that's probably what happened. But it creates impossible questions. Who was there? How did they know to be there at that exact time? Was this planned somehow? Or was someone cruising remote forest roads waiting for opportunities? Either explanation is deeply disturbing. Dog tracking to roads and stopping appears in numerous cases. It suggests vehicle involvement, which typically indicates human perpetrators. But the circumstances often make human involvement seem logistically impossible or require coincidence that strains credulity. This pattern sits uncomfortably between natural disappearance and human foul play, fitting neither category completely. Now let's discuss cases where missing people are found in bodies of water that were thoroughly searched during the initial investigation. Water searches are difficult, but not impossible. Trained divers with sonar equipment can locate bodies in most water conditions. Yet in some cases, bodies appear in water that was previously searched multiple times. In August 2013, a fisherman disappeared from a popular fishing area in Minnesota. He was fishing alone from the shore of a small lake. Other fishermen noticed his equipment abandoned and reported him missing. Search operations included extensive water searches. Divers searched the lake thoroughly. Sonar equipment scanned the bottom. The entire lake was covered systematically. No body was found. Weeks later, after searches had concluded, the fisherman's body was found floating in the same lake. Not washed up from elsewhere, but in the main body of the lake that had been searched. Medical examination suggested he'd been in the water since his disappearance. But how did multiple search teams miss a body that should have been detectable? One search and rescue diver said, "We searched that lake thoroughly. Sonar should have detected a body. Visual searches should have found it if it was floating. We covered that water multiple times with different teams. Either the body was somehow concealed or held down during searches and released later, or we're dealing with something that makes bodies undetectable during searches." Neither explanation makes sense, but the alternative is accepting that multiple trained teams all failed to find an obvious body in a small lake. Bodies appearing in previously searched water is one of the most troubling patterns. It suggests either systematic search failure, which seems unlikely given the training and equipment involved, or it suggests bodies are being moved or placed after initial searches. If bodies are being placed, the question becomes who or what is doing it, and why. Let's talk about cases involving people who had promised loved ones they'd be careful, who were hyper-aware of danger, who vanished anyway. These cases are particularly tragic because the victims were taking precautions. In July 2017, a woman named Rachel went hiking with explicit awareness of missing person cases. Rachel had read about missing 411 cases and was cautious because of this knowledge. She hiked with a friend, maintained contact with family via regular check-ins, carried all appropriate safety equipment. Rachel and her friend were hiking a well-marked trail in Washington. They maintained visual contact with each other as a specific precaution. At one point, Rachel said she needed to step off trail briefly for a bathroom break. Her friend waited on the trail, maintaining audio contact, talking to Rachel while she was out of sight. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Rachel's friend called out but got no response. She immediately went to investigate and found the spot where Rachel had been. Rachel was gone. Her friend called for help immediately. and search operations began within an hour. Despite the rapid response, the careful precautions, the immediate search, Rachel was never found. Rachel's family said she knew about these cases. She was being so careful. She stayed with her friend. She checked in with us. She did everything right, and she still vanished. That's what's so terrifying. You can know about this, you can be careful, and it can still happen. There's no guaranteed safety. Cases where careful people vanish anyway suggest that knowledge and precaution may not be sufficient protection. That whatever causes these disappearances can overcome even deliberate attempts to avoid it. This is perhaps the most disturbing implication of all. Now let's discuss cases where multiple disappearances occur from the same family over time. Families that seem to be particularly susceptible or targeted. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Morrison family in Oregon experienced 3 separate wilderness disappearances. First, a teenage son disappeared during a camping trip in 1978. Despite extensive searches, he was never found. In 1981, the family's daughter vanished while hiking with friends. She was found days later with no memory of her time missing. In 1984, the father disappeared during a solo hunting trip. His body was found months later in circumstances that raise questions. 3 separate incidents over 6 years, all involving the same family. Statistical analysts have looked at the probability of this occurring randomly. The chances of one family experiencing 3 wilderness disappearances is extremely low. This suggests either terrible luck or some connection that makes certain families more vulnerable. One statistical researcher said the Morrison family cases are troubling from the probability standpoint. 3 wilderness incidents in one family over 6 years, when most families will never experience even one, suggests non-random factors. Either the family had behaviors or practices that increase risk, or something was specifically targeting them. Neither explanation is comforting. A few other families have experienced multiple wilderness disappearances, or strange incidents. These cluster families deserve specific study to understand if there are common factors. Genetic susceptibility to whatever causes these cases. Behavioral patterns that increase risk. Some form of targeting based on family history or characteristics. We don't know, but the pattern is too striking to ignore. Let's talk about cases where the missing person had unusual dreams or premonitions before disappearing. Accounts suggesting they somehow knew something was going to happen. In June 2018, a man named David went on a hiking trip despite telling multiple people he had a bad feeling about it. David reported having recurring dreams about being lost in the woods. In the dreams, he was being called by something and couldn't resist following. He told his wife the dreams felt like warnings, but he couldn't explain why. Despite these feelings, David went on his planned hiking trip, not wanting to be controlled by irrational fears. David disappeared on the first day of the trip. His hiking partner reported that David had seemed distracted and anxious. David was found dead a week later, in circumstances that suggested he'd left the trail deliberately and walked in a specific direction with purpose. His wife said he knew something was going to happen. He told me about the dreams, about the feeling he had, but he didn't want to be superstitious or irrational. He thought he was being silly. Now I wonder if those dreams were actual warnings, if he was somehow perceiving what was coming and couldn't interpret it correctly. Several cases involve people reporting premonitions, bad feelings, or disturbing dreams before disappearing. Are these psychological coincidences, anxiety, manifesting randomly? Or are some people somehow sensitive to whatever causes these disappearances, perceiving danger before it materializes? The latter possibility suggests these events may have a temporal component, affecting people before they actually occur. That reality-bending implication is difficult to accept, but the pattern of premonitions exists. Now let's discuss cases where official reports differ significantly from witness accounts or physical evidence. Discrepancies that suggest either incompetence or deliberate alteration of facts. In September 2014, a teenager disappeared during a school hiking trip in California. Multiple students reported hearing the missing teen calling for help from a specific direction. Teachers and chaperones also heard the calls. The group moved toward the sounds to help. But as they approached, the calls stopped. They found no sign of the missing student in that area. Official reports of the incident don't mention the group hearing calls for help. The report describes the disappearance as the student wandering off unnoticed. But multiple witnesses confirmed they heard the calls and searched in that direction. When parents of other students inquired about the discrepancy, they were told the calls must have been confusion or misidentification of sounds. But over 20 people heard the same thing clearly enough to respond. One parent said, "My daughter was on that trip. She heard the calls for help. So did her friends, the teachers. Everyone." But the official report makes it sound like he just wandered off quietly. Why is the report different from what actually happened? Are they trying to avoid liability, or is there something about what happened that they don't want documented? Report discrepancies appear in multiple cases. Official versions that contradict witness statements or physical evidence. Facts that are minimized, omitted, or altered in documentation. This pattern fuels suspicion of cover-ups or deliberate information suppression. Whether the discrepancies are bureaucratic incompetence, liability avoidance, or something more sinister is unclear. But families deserve accurate documentation of what happened to their loved ones. Let's talk about cases where animals behave strangely in areas where people later disappear. Wildlife acting in ways that suggest they're avoiding something or warning about danger. In May 2015, hunters reported that deer in a specific area of forest in Montana were behaving unusually. Deer that would normally be in that area had moved out. The few deer that remained were skittish, nervous, constantly alert. Birds were absent from the area, no birdsong or activity. The forest felt empty and wrong to experienced hunters who knew the area. 2 weeks after these observations, a hiker disappeared in that same area. Despite extensive searches, the hiker was never found. Months later, wildlife returned to the area and behavior normalized. Local hunters said, "The animals knew something was wrong with that area. They left. We should have paid attention to that warning. When we did go in there to help search, it felt bad. Quiet. Empty. Wrong somehow. The animals were smarter than we were." Wildlife behavior as an indicator of danger appears in multiple cases. Areas where disappearances occur often have reduced wildlife presence beforehand. Animals avoiding specific locations or trails. Unusual silence, absence of birds, reduced animal activity. Indigenous peoples have long taught that when animals avoid an area, humans should too. Modern outdoors people often dismiss this as superstition. But the pattern suggests animals may perceive dangers that humans miss. Paying attention to wildlife behavior could be a valuable safety practice. Now let's discuss the pattern of disappearances happening at twilight or dusk. Transitional times of day that appear frequently in these cases. In July 2016, researchers compiled timing data for hundreds of wilderness disappearances. They found that a disproportionate number occurred during dawn or dusk hours. More than would be expected if disappearances were randomly distributed across daylight hours. The twilight pattern is statistically significant. Why would disappearances cluster at these times? One theory, reduced visibility, makes it easier for predators, human or otherwise, to take victims. Another theory, transitional times have unusual properties, thin times when boundaries are permeable. The latter sounds like folklore, but the statistical pattern exists regardless of explanation. One researcher said the clustering at twilight hours is real and significant. Either it's coincidence driven by when people are most active in wilderness, or there's something about twilight that's relevant to these disappearances. Many cultures treat dawn and dusk as liminal times, neither day nor night, when normal rules don't apply. Maybe there's something to that ancient wisdom. If the twilight pattern is real and meaningful, it suggests avoiding wilderness activity during those hours could reduce risk. Being at camp or on maintained trails during dawn and dusk rather than traveling through wilderness. This is practical advice even without understanding why the pattern exists. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's shoes are found tied together. Not simply removed, but deliberately tied together and placed. In October 2017, a hiker's shoes were found in Colorado. The shoes were tied together by their laces that had been tied in a specific knot. The shoes were placed on a rock near a trail, positioned visibly as if for discovery. The hiker they belonged to was never found. But those shoes, tied together deliberately, suggested human involvement. Yet who would tie shoes together and leave them as a marker? If foul play, why draw attention with such an obvious marker? If the hiker did it, why tie the shoes together before continuing on barefoot? One investigator said, "Those tied shoes are one of the strangest pieces of evidence I've encountered. They were deliberately tied together and placed, but we can't determine by whom or why. It's like a message we can't read or a marker we don't understand." Shoes tied together appear in a few cases, too many to be entirely random. This specific detail suggests some form of ritualistic or communicative behavior, but the meaning remains opaque. Now let's discuss cases where electronics pick up strange signals or communications during searches. Radio interference, odd transmissions, signals that shouldn't exist. In August 2018, search and rescue teams looking for a missing person in Washington experienced unusual radio problems. Their communications were repeatedly interrupted by bursts of static and tone patterns. The patterns weren't random, they had structure and seemed almost like communication attempts. Technicians checked the equipment and found no malfunctions. The interference only occurred in the specific search area and stopped when teams moved away. One SR communication specialist said, those patterns weren't natural interference. They were structured, repeating, almost like someone trying to communicate using our frequencies. But no one else should have been transmitting in that area, and the patterns didn't match any standard communication protocols. It was like something was trying to talk to us, but we couldn't understand the language. Electronic interference during searches appears in multiple cases. Sometimes just static or failure, sometimes structured signals that suggest intelligence. The technology failure pattern we've discussed may not be passive malfunction, but active interference by something with understanding of electronics. Let's talk about cases involving people who made unusual purchases or preparations before disappearing. Actions that, in retrospect, seem like they were preparing for something. In June 2019, a woman named Lisa bought several items before a camping trip that seemed odd. Large quantities of water purification tablets, far more than a weekend trip would need. Extra batteries and flashlight supplies. First aid supplies that seemed excessive. Waterproof storage containers. Her friends commented on the unusual purchases, but thought she was just being overly prepared. Lisa disappeared on that camping trip. When her belongings were found, most of the supplies she'd purchased were unused. It was as if she'd been preparing for an extended stay in wilderness, but never got to use the supplies. Her family said, looking back at what Lisa bought before the trip, it's like she knew she was going to be in the woods longer than planned, but she died within days of disappearing. So she never needed most of what she bought. Was she somehow sensing what was coming and trying to prepare? Or is it just tragic irony that she bought survival supplies she never got to use? Unusual preparations before disappearing appear in several cases. People buying supplies for scenarios that don't match their stated plans, as if unconsciously preparing for what's about to happen. This pattern suggests some level of precognition or sensitivity to future events. Whether that's possible is a question that challenges our understanding of time and consciousness. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's last known communication contained odd phrasing or unusual content. Messages that seem normal at the time, but appear significant in retrospect. In July 2020, a hiker sent a text message to his wife that read, "The trees are watching. I know that sounds crazy. We'll explain when I get home." That was his last communication. He never came home and was never found, despite extensive searches. The text message has been analyzed extensively. Was he joking? Was he experiencing paranoia or altered mental state? Was he perceiving something real that he couldn't articulate better? His wife said, he wasn't prone to jokes like that. He was practical, grounded. For him to text something about trees watching, he must have been experiencing something that troubled him. I wish he'd explain more. I wish he'd come out of the woods right then, instead of continuing. That message feels like a warning he gave, but we didn't understand until too late. Final messages containing odd content appear in multiple cases. People mentioning feeling watched, describing unusual experiences, reporting phenomena they can't explain. These messages are often dismissed as jokes or stress-induced imagination, but they may be actual observations of whatever causes these disappearances. Taking such communication seriously and responding with immediate evacuation might save lives. Let's talk about the pattern of missing people being found on the opposite side of obstacles they shouldn't have been able to cross. Elderly people found across rivers they couldn't have waded. Children found past cliffs they couldn't have climbed. People on the other side of ridges that would require technical equipment to traverse. In September 2015, an 80-year-old woman with mobility issues disappeared from a care facility adjacent to wilderness in California. The woman used a walker and could barely manage level ground. She was found 3 days later on the other side of a steep ravine and fast-moving creek. To reach where she was found would have required descending the ravine, crossing the creek, and climbing the opposite side. This would be challenging for a healthy young adult. For an 80-year-old with a walker, it should have been impossible. Yet she was found there, deceased from exposure. One investigator said, "There's no rational explanation for how she got there. She couldn't have made that crossing on her own. Either someone carried her there, which raises the question of who and why, or something we don't understand happened. The location of her body makes no sense given her physical capabilities." Impossible crossings appear regularly in these cases. People found in locations that their physical condition makes unreachable. This strongly suggests they were transported rather than traveling under their own power. But by whom or what, and for what reason? Now let's discuss cases where multiple search methods all fail simultaneously in ways that seem coordinated. Dogs can't track, helicopters see nothing. Ground searchers find no traces, all at once. In October 2019, a child disappeared in Olympic National Park. Search response was immediate and comprehensive. Multiple search dog teams, helicopters with thermal imaging, drones with cameras, hundreds of ground searchers. Every technology and technique available was deployed. Yet every method failed. Dogs couldn't pick up scent trails. Thermal imaging showed nothing despite the child having normal body temperature. Drones covered vast areas, but detected nothing. Ground searchers covered the terrain systematically, but found no traces. The child was eventually found alive by a solo hiker who wasn't part of the official search, in an area that had been searched multiple times. The comprehensive failure of every search method is statistically improbable. One search coordinator said, "I've never seen every system fail simultaneously. Dogs usually work, even when other methods don't. Thermal imaging is highly reliable. Ground searches with that many trained personnel should find something. But everything failed. It's like the child was invisible to our technology and methods. Then a random hiker stumbles upon him in a previously searched area. That's not normal search outcomes." Comprehensive search failure suggests either the technologies and techniques are far less effective than believed, or something about these cases makes standard methods ineffective. If searches are being deliberately evaded or blocked, that implies intelligence and capability beyond what we normally consider. Let's talk about cases where the found person or body has injuries that don't match the terrain or circumstances. Injuries that seem inflicted rather than accidental. In May 2016, a hiker was found deceased in New Mexico. The hiker had injuries that the medical examiner found difficult to explain. Broken bones that didn't match falls or impacts with terrain. The pattern of fractures suggested compression rather than impact, as if the person had been squeezed or crushed rather than falling. But there was no equipment or terrain feature that would create such injuries. Toxicology was negative, ruling out impairment. The medical examiner listed cause of death as undetermined trauma because the injury pattern didn't fit any standard explanation. One pathologist reviewing the case said the fracture patterns are unusual. They suggest enormous pressure applied to the body, but the setting doesn't explain how. It's not consistent with falling, with being struck by something, or with any standard wilderness injury mechanism. I've never seen trauma like this outside of industrial accidents involving heavy machinery. Unexplained injuries appear in several cases. Trauma that doesn't match the environment. Injuries suggesting forces or mechanisms that shouldn't be present. This physical evidence is difficult to dismiss, but equally difficult to explain. Now let's discuss the cases where people are found in areas that had been marked by search teams as already cleared. Physical markers left by searchers proving they'd covered an area, yet bodies appearing there later. In July 2018, search teams in Montana marked trees with colored tape as they searched. This is standard practice to ensure systematic coverage and prevent searching the same areas repeatedly. The marked areas had been thoroughly checked, documented as clear. Days later, after the official search concluded, a hiker found the missing person's body. The body was in an area marked as searched, with search tape still visible on nearby trees. The body was positioned in the open, not concealed. Search teams insisted they'd covered that area thoroughly. Photographs from the search confirmed searchers had been in that exact location. Yet they'd found nothing, and days later a body was there. One SARE team leader said, "We searched that area. I was personally there. We photographed our search pattern. The tape markings prove we covered it. That body was not there during our search. I'm certain of it, which means it was placed there after we searched. But by whom? Why? The implications are deeply disturbing." Bodies appearing in marked cleared areas is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that something abnormal is happening. The physical proof of searches having covered an area yet bodies appearing there later is difficult to explain conventionally. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's belongings show signs of being tampered with or examined. Items that have been opened, rearranged, or handled by someone. In August 2017, a backpack belonging to a missing hiker was found in Colorado. The backpack had been opened and the contents examined. Items were removed from their original pockets and placed in different locations within the pack. A journal had been opened and specific pages appeared to have been looked at, shown by smudges and creases. But the backpack was found in a location no other hikers would have accessed. If someone found the backpack, why examine contents and rearrange items rather than taking it to authorities? The pattern of examination suggested someone was looking for something specific or trying to understand who the owner was. One investigator said that backpack was searched by someone, items were deliberately moved and examined. But who would find a backpack in that remote location, go through it carefully, then leave it there? If it was foul play, why not dispose of the evidence? If it was innocent hikers, why not report finding it? The behavior doesn't match any normal scenario. Belongings showing evidence of examination appear in multiple cases, as if someone or something is studying the victims, learning about them through their possessions. This suggests intelligence and curiosity, a desire to understand rather than simply dispose of evidence. As we near the end of this exploration, let's consider the cumulative weight of all these patterns. Individually, cases can be explained away. Someone got disoriented. Someone had a medical emergency. Someone encountered foul play. Coincidences happen. But when you compile hundreds of cases and see patterns emerge, the explanations become strained. Too many impossible distances. Too many search dog failures. Too many bodies in previously searched locations. Too many victims found without shoes. Too many cases near water. Too many disappearances at twilight. Too many strange encounters reported by survivors. Too many failures of every search method. Too many injuries that don't match circumstances. Too many anomalies that repeat across cases. At some point, the accumulation of anomalies demands we consider that something genuinely unusual is happening. Not supernatural necessarily, but beyond our current understanding. Whether it's unknown predators operating in wilderness areas, human trafficking, or criminal networks we haven't detected, dimensional or temporal anomalies in specific locations, psychological phenomena we don't comprehend affecting people in wilderness, combinations of factors creating perfect storms of disappearance conditions, or something else entirely that we haven't imagined. Whatever the truth is, the patterns suggest it's real and ongoing. People continue to disappear under these strange circumstances. Families continue to be devastated by unexplained losses. Search and rescue professionals continue to encounter cases that trouble them. And the wilderness continues to keep its secrets. The forests are ancient and vast. They contain ecosystems we've barely studied. They hold areas humans rarely visit. They harbor life we haven't fully cataloged. And perhaps they contain phenomena we haven't recognized. Things that have been there longer than human civilization. Things that interact with humans who enter their domain in ways we don't understand. Things that follow rules and patterns that we're only beginning to perceive through accumulation of tragic data. The missing 411 cases are a modern mystery with deep roots. These patterns have likely existed for as long as humans have ventured into wilderness. Our ancestors knew to fear the forests, created warnings and taboos about wilderness areas, told stories of things that take people. Modern society dismissed these warnings as superstition. We thought science and technology made us immune to whatever our ancestors feared. But the disappearances continue. The patterns persist. And we're left struggling to explain what's happening with our modern frameworks and finding them inadequate. Perhaps the lesson is humility. Recognition that wilderness is genuinely wild and genuinely dangerous in ways that surpass simple physical hazards. Respect for places that operate by rules we don't fully understand. Caution and preparation that goes beyond normal safety practices. An awareness that despite our technology and knowledge, we're still vulnerable to mysteries we can't solve. But let's go even deeper into these disturbing patterns, because there are aspects we haven't fully examined that deserve attention. Let's talk about cases where the missing person left behind evidence of a structured plan or journey that makes no logical sense. Routes that seem purposeful but lead nowhere productive. In November 2014, a hiker disappeared in the Appalachian region. When searchers found his campsite, they discovered something unusual. A hand-drawn map with a route marked carefully. The route didn't follow any existing trails. It led through extremely difficult terrain toward no particular destination. Waypoints were marked with times, suggesting the hiker was following a schedule. But the waypoints didn't correspond to any known landmarks or features of interest. The map appeared to have been drawn with care and forethought, not the confused scrawlings of someone disoriented. Yet the route made no sense for any recreational or practical purpose. The hiker was found deceased at one of the marked waypoints, as if he'd been following his own map until he died. One investigator said, "That map troubles me deeply. It shows planning and purpose. The hiker knew where he was going, but where he was going makes no sense. Why would someone plot a course through extremely difficult terrain to arbitrary points? Who plans a journey like that? It's like he was following instructions or completing a mission, but we can't determine what mission or why." Similar cases exist where victims left evidence of intentional journeys to locations with no apparent purpose. As if they were being directed or were following some internal compulsion, they documented. This suggests these disappearances may not always be random events, but sometimes involve the victim actively participating in their own disappearance, possibly under influence or compulsion they don't understand. Now let's discuss cases where other hikers or campers in the area report feeling compelled to leave suddenly. People experiencing strong urges to evacuate areas where someone later disappears. In August 2016, a family camping in Oregon reported feeling an overwhelming urge to leave their campsite. They described it as irrational but undeniable anxiety, in the sense that they needed to leave immediately. Despite having planned to stay for 3 days, they packed up after one night and left. They felt foolish about it, but couldn't shake the feeling. 2 days later, a solo hiker disappeared from that same area. The family saw the news coverage and reported their experience to authorities. Other campers from around the same time came forward with similar stories. Multiple groups had cut their stays short, feeling uncomfortable or anxious without clear reason. One person said, "I've camped all my life. I know what normal wilderness anxiety feels like. This was different. It was a screaming internal alarm telling me to get out. I felt ridiculous packing up early, but I couldn't stay. When I heard someone disappeared there, I understood. Something was wrong with that place at that time, and some of us were sensitive enough to feel it." Groups feeling compelled to leave areas before disappearances suggest there may be detectable precursors. Some people are sensitive to whatever causes these events and experience warning signs. If we understood what these sensitive people were detecting, we might be able to develop early warning systems or detection methods. But currently, these are dismissed as anxiety or imagination rather than potentially valid threat detection. Let's talk about cases involving people who exhibited personality changes in the weeks before disappearing. Behavioral shifts that troubled those close to them but weren't extreme enough to intervene. In June 2017, a man named Thomas began acting differently about 3 weeks before he disappeared. His wife noticed he was distant, preoccupied, spending more time looking at maps of wilderness areas. He talked about hearing things at night, though they lived in a suburban neighborhood with no wilderness nearby. He became interested in disappearance cases, researching them online, reading about missing 411. His wife thought he was developing an unhealthy obsession or anxiety disorder. She suggested counseling, but Thomas insisted he was fine. Then he went on a planned camping trip and never returned. His wife said, "Looking back, it's like something was preparing him or calling to him for weeks. He was being drawn toward whatever happened to him. If I'd understood that, if I'd stopped him from going, maybe he'd still be alive. But I thought he was just stressed or having a midlife crisis interest in the outdoors." Personality changes before disappearances appear in enough cases to suggest a pattern, as if whatever causes these events begins interacting with victims before the actual disappearance. A preparation phase where the person is influenced, drawn, prepared for what's coming. This pattern suggests these aren't random encounters, but may involve some form of targeting or selection process that occurs before the physical disappearance. Now let's discuss cases where victims' watches or clocks were found stopped at specific times. Times that don't match the estimated time of death or disappearance. In September 2018, a hiker's body was found in Wyoming. The hiker was wearing a watch that had stopped at 3:33 a.m. But medical examination suggested the hiker had died in daylight hours, not at night. The watch was mechanical, in good condition, no reason for it to have stopped. Yet it showed 3:33 exactly when found weeks later. In another case, from 2019, a missing person's watch was found stopped at 11:11. Again, the time didn't match the circumstances of the disappearance. Multiple cases involve watches stopped at times with repeating digits or notable numbers. This pattern has led to speculation about electromagnetic interference or temporal anomalies. One watchmaker who examined several watches from these cases said, "Mechanical watches don't just stop for no reason, especially quality timepieces in good condition. And they certainly don't stop at mathematically interesting times by coincidence. Either something is affecting these watches' mechanisms in ways we don't understand, or the times have significance we're not grasping. It's genuinely puzzling." Stopped watches are a small detail in these cases, but the pattern of specific times is intriguing. Are these clues being left? Evidence of temporal distortion. Markers of when something significant happened, even if we don't understand what. The consistency of this detail across unrelated cases suggests it's meaningful, even if we can't interpret the meaning. Let's talk about cases where search helicopters experienced mechanical issues over specific areas. Equipment failures concentrated in particular locations. In July 2015, a search helicopter in Montana experienced engine trouble while flying over a section of forest. The pilot managed to land safely outside the search area. Mechanics found no clear cause for the engine issue. The helicopter was cleared to fly and experienced no further problems. The next day, a different helicopter searching the same area experienced electrical failures. Again, no clear cause was found, and the helicopter operated normally elsewhere. Over the course of a week-long search, 3 different helicopters experienced unexplained technical issues over the same geographic area. One pilot said, "I've flown for 20 years. I know when something is mechanically wrong versus something else." What happened over that search area didn't feel like normal mechanical failure. The systems went haywire, then normalized as soon as we left the area. It was localized interference, like something in that location was affecting our electronics. Helicopter issues over specific search areas suggest localized interference of some kind. Whether it's natural electromagnetic phenomena, intentional jamming, or something else is unclear. But the pattern of multiple aircraft experiencing problems in the same location is significant. It suggests certain areas have properties that affect technology in detectable ways. If these properties can be mapped, it might help identify high-risk areas or understand what's causing the interference. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person had recently visited the area before disappearing there. Scouting trips or previous visits that seemed to draw them back. In October 2016, a woman named Jennifer had visited a specific trail in Colorado 3 times in the month before she disappeared. Friends thought it was odd, since the trail wasn't particularly scenic or interesting. Jennifer said she felt drawn to the area, that there was something she needed to understand about it. On her 4th visit, Jennifer disappeared. She was never found despite the area being well known and regularly patrolled. Her friends said, Jennifer was obsessed with that trail for a month. She kept going back, saying she needed to figure something out. We thought she was using it for meditation or processing something personal, but it was like the place was calling her back repeatedly until it finally took her. Return visits before disappearance suggest a pull or attraction that builds over time, as if certain locations exert influence that increases with exposure. People become fixated on specific areas, return repeatedly, then disappear on a subsequent visit. This pattern implies these locations have properties that affect human consciousness or behavior, creating compulsions to return until something happens. Let's talk about cases where children draw pictures or describe places before disappearing that match, where they're later found. Precognitive awareness or coincidence. In May 2017, a 5-year-old boy drew a picture of where the bear lives. The picture showed a specific landscape with distinctive rock formations and trees. 2 weeks later, the boy disappeared during a family camping trip. He was found alive after 2 days near rock formations that matched his drawing remarkably well. When asked about the drawing, the boy said he dreamed about the place before going camping. He'd never been to that area before the camping trip, so the drawing couldn't have been based on memory. His parents said, looking at that drawing now, it clearly shows where we found him. He drew it 2 weeks before we even planned the camping trip. How did he know what that place looked like? How did he dream about a specific location he'd never seen? It's like he was shown where he would be, or where something would happen. Several cases involve children producing art or descriptions of locations before experiencing events at those locations. This precognitive pattern is one of the most difficult to explain conventionally. If children are somehow perceiving future events or locations, it suggests temporal anomalies or consciousness capabilities we don't understand. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's phone or GPS shows impossible location data. Devices recording positions that couldn't be physically accurate. In August 2019, a hiker's smartphone was recovered after he disappeared. The phone's GPS log showed location data that made no sense. According to the GPS, the hiker had traveled over 60 miles in 3 hours. The terrain would make such speed impossible even by vehicle, which couldn't access that wilderness. But the GPS timestamps and location coordinates were clear. The phone had logged the hiker at locations separated by dozens of miles within minutes of each other. One digital forensics expert said the GPS data is corrupted, or the phone was somehow spoofed into recording false locations. But the data structure looks valid, and GPS spoofing at that level would require sophisticated equipment. Either the phone malfunctioned in a very specific way that created impossible but structured data, or the hiker actually moved between these locations at impossible speeds. Neither explanation is satisfying. Impossible GPS data appears in several cases where phones or GPS devices are recovered. Location logs showing speeds or positions that defy physics. This evidence suggests either significant electronic interference with devices or actual movement at impossible speeds or through impossible routes. If it's interference, something is sophisticated enough to create false but internally consistent GPS data. If it's actual movement, something is capable of transporting people at speeds and through routes that shouldn't be possible. Let's talk about cases where people disappeared and were later found speaking languages or using words they didn't know before. Linguistic changes that suggest learning or influence during missing time. A documented case from 2013 involved a child who disappeared for 3 days in Washington state. The child was found alive and mostly well, but the child spoke phrases in a language the family didn't recognize. Linguistic experts who examined recordings identified elements similar to ancient indigenous languages no longer commonly spoken. The child had no exposure to these languages before disappearing. The family spoke only English at home, and the child attended regular school. Yet after those 3 days, the child occasionally used words and phrases from a language they shouldn't know. One linguist said, "The child is using what appear to be words from Shinnecoin family languages, some of which haven't been actively spoken in over a century. Where did this child learn these words?" The usage is contextually appropriate, suggesting genuine understanding, not just random sounds. This is knowledge that shouldn't exist in this child's mind. Language acquisition during missing time suggests teaching or immersion experiences. The child was somewhere or with someone during those 3 days who spoke these languages. But who speaks extinct languages in wilderness areas? And why would they teach a missing child? The implications are disturbing and mysterious. Now let's discuss cases involving symbols or markings found at disappearance sites that match patterns across different locations. Recurring symbols that appear in multiple unrelated cases. In various disappearance sites across North America, investigators have occasionally found markings that seem intentional but whose meaning is unclear. Stacked rocks in specific patterns. Scratches or carvings on trees that follow similar designs. Arrangements of natural materials that seem too organized to be random. These markings don't match known human graffiti or trail markers. They appear too consistently across different locations to be coincidental. In 2018, a researcher compiled photographs of such markings from 20 different disappearance sites. The patterns showed similarities that suggested common origin or meaning. Circular arrangements, specific stacking patterns, symbols that recurred with slight variations. One anthropologist who studied the patterns said these markings have structure and consistency. They're not random, natural formations or standard human trail marking. They follow patterns that suggest communication or territorial markers. But whose? No known group uses these specific patterns. They don't match indigenous markings or modern outdoor signaling systems. It's like there's a marking system operating in wilderness areas that we don't recognize. If these markings are intentional, who creates them and why? Are they warnings to others? Territory markers? Communication between whatever is responsible for disappearances? The consistency across locations suggests a widespread presence, not isolated incidents. Let's talk about cases where multiple search parties independently report seeing the same unexplained phenomenon. Shared sightings that can't be dismissed as individual error. During a search in 2016 in Montana, 3 separate search teams reported seeing unusual lights in the forest. The lights were described consistently, white or blue-white, moving slowly through trees at ground level, not flashlights, which search teams recognize easily. These lights moved in ways that flashlights don't, passing through dense vegetation without bob or sway. Teams attempted to approach the lights, thinking they might be related to the missing person. But the lights would retreat as teams approached, maintaining distance. After hours of this, the lights disappeared. The missing person was found the next day in the area where lights had been seen, deceased. Search team leaders documented the light sightings in official reports. One team leader said, "Multiple teams saw these lights independently before we communicated about them. That rules out suggestion or mass hallucination. Something was in that forest creating lights that moved intelligently. We tried to approach, and it evaded us. I don't know what it was, but I know what we saw." Shared unexplained sightings during searches add credibility to unusual phenomena reports. When trained professionals see something strange collectively, it deserves serious consideration. These aren't easily frightened civilians or attention seekers. These are experienced professionals whose reports should be taken seriously. Now let's discuss cases where time seems to pass differently for the missing person versus the searchers. Temporal discrepancies that can't be explained by disorientation alone. In July 2018, a man was found after being missing for 6 days. The man insisted he'd only been gone for 1 day. Not disoriented confusion, but genuine conviction with specific memories supporting his timeline. He could describe the sunset he'd seen the previous evening in detail. He could describe his activities hour by hour for what he believed was 1 day. Medical examination found his physical condition consistent with about 2 days without food, not 6. His beard growth suggested less time than 6 days. Yet he'd been missing for 6 days, according to multiple confirmed sources. One doctor said his physical condition doesn't match 6 days of deprivation. His facial hair growth is wrong for that timeline. His hydration status is wrong, and his subjective experience is firmly that only 1 day passed. Either our timeline is wrong, which seems impossible given the documentation, or he experienced time differently than normal during his missing period. Temporal discrepancies between objective and subjective time suggest something about these disappearances affects the perception or experience of time. Whether this is psychological, neurological, or represents actual temporal anomalies is unclear. But the pattern recurs too often to be random confusion. Let's talk about cases where animals are found dead in the vicinity of disappearances with no clear cause of death. Wildlife deaths that cluster around disappearance events. In September 2017, during the search for a missing child in Oregon, searchers found multiple dead animals in the search area. Birds, small mammals, all deceased with no obvious cause. No signs of predation, disease, or injury. The animals appear to have simply died suddenly. Wildlife biologists examined some specimens and found no toxins or pathogens. One biologist said, "These animals died from something that left no trace, no trauma, no poison we can detect, no disease. It's like something passed through this area that was lethal to wildlife but left no evidence. And it happened around the time that child disappeared." The child was found alive eventually, but the animal deaths remain unexplained. Similar patterns of unexplained animal deaths around disappearance sites appear in other cases. As if whatever causes human disappearances also affects wildlife, either deliberately or as a side effect. This suggests the phenomenon isn't specifically targeting humans, but affects multiple species. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person is found with possessions they didn't have when they disappeared. New items of unknown origin. In June 2019, a missing hiker was found with a piece of rope tied around their wrist. The rope wasn't from their gear. It was a type of cordage not commonly used in modern outdoor equipment. Analysis showed it was handmade from natural fibers, using traditional techniques. The hiker had no memory of how the rope came to be on their wrist. They had no crafting skills to make such cordage themselves. One investigator said, "That rope was deliberately tied around the victim's wrist by someone with traditional rope-making knowledge. But who and why? If this was foul play, why leave the victim alive with a rope bracelet? If it was help from someone, why not take the victim to safety?" The rope is physical evidence of someone interacting with the victim, but we can't determine who or what their intent was. Found objects that victims didn't possess originally suggest interaction with others during missing time. But the objects are often unusual types that raise more questions than answers. Traditional items, handmade objects, things that seem out of place in modern wilderness encounters. Let's talk about cases where rescue was prevented or delayed by unusual obstacles that appeared suddenly. Barriers that seem to prevent searchers from reaching victims. In August 2015, search teams in Colorado were converging on an area where they believed the missing person was located based on evidence. As they approached, a flash flood occurred in a canyon they needed to cross. This was unusual because no rain had fallen in the immediate area. The flood came from upstream, where there had been a brief, localized storm. The timing prevented search teams from reaching the victim for 12 additional hours. When they finally reached the area, they found the victim deceased. Medical examination suggested the victim had died approximately 12 hours earlier, around the time the flood prevented rescuers from reaching them. One searcher said, "That flood happened at exactly the wrong time. If we'd been 30 minutes earlier, we'd have crossed before it. If we'd reached the victim sooner, they might have survived." The timing felt malicious, like something didn't want us to reach them in time. Multiple cases involve obstacles appearing at critical moments that prevent timely rescue. Storms that ground helicopters just before aerial searches would have found the victim. Rock slides that block access routes. Flash floods in canyons. These obstacles occur often enough that some searchers believe there's a pattern. Whether it's just tragic coincidence or something more intentional is debatable. But the timing of obstacles in these cases is often eerily precise. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's family members experience strange phenomena at home during the time of disappearance. Long-distance experiences that seem connected to the missing person situation. In October 2016, a woman's husband disappeared during a hiking trip in Wyoming. The night he disappeared, she woke at 3 a.m. with an overwhelming feeling of terror. She described feeling like she couldn't breathe, like something was suffocating her. The sensation lasted several minutes, then passed. She noted the time, 3:17 a.m. Later investigation determined that 3:17 a.m. was approximately when her husband died, accounting for time zone differences. She had no way of knowing he was in distress at that exact moment. She said, "I felt his fear, his death. I know that sounds impossible, but I woke up dying, experiencing what he was experiencing. Then it stopped because he was gone. I knew something terrible had happened even before I got the call that he was missing." Shared experiences between missing people and family members are reported in multiple cases. Family members waking with sudden knowledge that something is wrong. Experiencing physical sensations or emotions that match what the victim was presumably experiencing. This suggests connections between people that transcend physical distance, whether these are psychological phenomena, quantum entanglement of consciousness, or something else is unknown. But the correlation between reported experiences and actual events is too consistent to be entirely coincidental. Let's talk about cases where photographs taken in areas where people later disappear show anomalies. images with unusual features that weren't visible to the naked eye. In July 2017, a photographer took landscape photos in a national park. When reviewing the images later, she noticed something strange in several photos. In the background of 3 different images, there appeared to be a figure or shape that she didn't see when taking the photos. The figure was partially obscured by trees, but consistent across the photos. It wasn't a person from her group, and she saw no one else in that area. The shape was human-sized but oddly proportioned. 2 weeks later, someone disappeared from that exact trail. The photographer reported her photos to authorities. Analysis of the images confirmed something was present in the photos, but experts couldn't determine what. One photo analyst said, "There's definitely something in these images. It's not camera artifact or photo manipulation. Something was there that the photographer didn't consciously observe. Whether it's relevant to the later disappearance is speculation, but the location match is notable." Photographic anomalies in areas where disappearances occur suggest that cameras sometimes capture things human perception misses. Whether due to different wavelength sensitivity, longer exposure times, or other technical factors, cameras may document presences that humans don't consciously observe. This makes photographic evidence particularly valuable for understanding what's in these areas. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person had been researching disappearances or missing person cases before they themselves disappeared, as if knowledge of the phenomenon drew attention to them. In November 2018, a man had been researching missing 411 cases extensively. He posted on forums about the patterns, expressed fascination with the mysteries. He planned a hiking trip specifically to an area where several disappearances had occurred. He told online friends he wanted to see if he could experience anything unusual. He disappeared on that trip. His body was found months later with circumstances that matched typical missing 411 patterns. Online communities were disturbed by this. One forum member said he was actively researching these cases, then became one himself. It's like his attention to the phenomenon made him a target. Multiple people in our community have stopped researching after this because it feels dangerous, like looking too closely draws unwanted attention. Several researchers and enthusiasts have reported strange experiences after delving deeply into these cases. Feeling watched, having nightmares, experiencing unusual events. Some have stopped researching because they felt it was affecting them negatively. This raises the unsettling possibility that studying these phenomena might create vulnerability to them. Whether through psychological priming or actual attention from whatever causes the disappearances is unclear. But the pattern is concerning enough that some researchers recommend caution. Let's talk about cases where the search is called off or discontinued for unusual reasons. Premature cessation of searches that seem unjustified. In September 2019, a search for a missing child in California was called off after only 3 days. The official reason was budget constraints and low probability of finding the child alive. But searchers and family members felt the search was abandoned prematurely. The area wasn't impossibly large, and weather wasn't preventing searches. Some searchers reported being told to stop for reasons that weren't clearly explained. One SR member said anonymously, "We were told to stop searching when we felt we were getting close. The official reasons didn't make sense. We had resources, we had time, we had leads. But someone decided to call it off. Some of us wondered if whoever made that decision knew something we didn't, like they knew we wouldn't find the child or shouldn't find what was out there." Searches ended for unclear reasons appear in multiple cases. Sometimes the decisions seem to come from higher authorities overriding local search coordinators. This fuels speculation about cover-ups or suppressed knowledge. Whether searches are called off for legitimate reasons that aren't communicated clearly, or for more sinister reasons, is difficult to determine. But the pattern contributes to mistrust of authorities and beliefs that more is known than is publicly shared. Now let's discuss cases where local indigenous peoples or long-term residents warn about specific areas, and their warnings are proven justified. Traditional knowledge that modern visitors ignore at their peril. In a region of Montana, local Native American elders had long warned about a particular valley. They said it was a wrong place where people shouldn't go. Modern hikers dismissed these warnings as superstition. Over a period of 10 years, 4 people disappeared in that valley. 3 were never found. 1 was found deceased under strange circumstances. After the 4th disappearance, outdoor groups began respecting the warnings and avoiding that valley. One local resident said the elders knew that valley was dangerous. They tried to warn people, but outsiders thought they were being primitive or superstitious. Now 4 people are gone, and maybe people will listen. Indigenous knowledge exists for reasons. When people who've lived with the land for generations tell you to avoid a place, there's wisdom in listening. Multiple locations have similar warnings from indigenous peoples or long-term local residents. Places described as wrong, cursed, dangerous, places where people disappear. Modern society often dismisses these warnings until tragedy proves them justified. Respecting traditional knowledge about wilderness dangers is more than cultural sensitivity. It's practical safety based on centuries of observation. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's body showed evidence of being carefully positioned or arranged after death. Postmortem positioning that suggests someone handled the body. In October 2020, a hiker's body was found in a clearing in Oregon. The body was positioned on its back, arms crossed over chest, legs straight. Personal items were arranged around the body in an organized pattern. Medical examination confirmed the person had died from exposure several days before being found. But the positioning and arrangement of items appeared to have been done shortly before discovery. Someone had moved and arranged the body and belongings after death, but before discovery. Who would do this and why? If it was other hikers, why not report finding the body? If it was search and rescue, why would they arrange items ceremonially? One investigator said that body and those belongings were arranged with care, almost reverently. Someone spent time positioning everything deliberately, but we can't determine who or why. If this was foul play, why the careful arrangement? If this was help from someone, why not alert authorities? The behavior doesn't fit any normal scenario. Arranged bodies appear in enough cases to suggest a pattern, as if whatever is responsible for the deaths has respect for the deceased, or is sending messages through the arrangements. The care taken in positioning suggests intelligence and purpose, not random predation or disposal. Now let's discuss the pattern of people disappearing, shortly after expressing fear or unease about the wilderness. Premonitions that prove accurate. In June 2018, a woman told her family she had a bad feeling about an upcoming camping trip. She couldn't articulate why, just a sense of dread. Her family encouraged her to go anyway, thinking she was just nervous about camping. She disappeared on the second day of the trip. Her family said she told us she didn't want to go. She said something felt wrong. We thought she was being anxious for no reason. Now we wish we'd listened. Her instincts were trying to warn her, and we talked her out of trusting them. Multiple cases involve people expressing unease or fear before trips where they disappear, as if some people have precognitive sensitivity to danger. Society teaches us to ignore irrational fears and trust logic over instinct. But in wilderness contexts, instinct may be detecting real dangers that logic can't articulate. Trusting gut feelings about wilderness areas might be better safety practice than we acknowledge. Let's talk about cases where searchers find evidence of the missing person traveling in directions that make no sense. Routes that avoid easier paths for difficult terrain with no apparent reason. In August 2017, trackers followed evidence of a missing hiker in Montana. The tracks showed the hiker had deliberately left the trail and traveled through extremely difficult terrain. Areas with dense undergrowth, steep slopes, obstacles that any rational person would avoid. Meanwhile, parallel to this difficult route, an easy trail existed that would have been faster and safer. The hiker's route made no practical sense. It was as if they were deliberately choosing the hardest possible path, or as if they were avoiding the trail for some reason, or as if they were following something that didn't use trails. One tracker said that route was bizarre. Why would anyone choose to push through that terrain when there's a trail 50 yards away, unless they were disoriented, but the tracks showed purposeful movement, not wandering, or unless they were following something that didn't use human trails, or unless they were avoiding the trail because they feared something on it. None of these explanations is comforting. Inexplicable routes appear frequently in these cases. Paths that suggest the victim was following something, fleeing something, or was in an altered state where normal pathfinding didn't apply. The deliberate nature of these routes rules out simple disorientation. Something motivated the path choices, even if we can't determine what. Now let's discuss cases where electronic voice phenomena or unusual sounds were captured on recording devices found with victims. Audio evidence that's difficult to explain. In September 2016, a missing person's digital voice recorder was found in Colorado. The recorder had been left running and captured several hours of audio. Most was expected sounds, wind, wildlife, the victim's breathing, and footsteps. But portions of the recording contained sounds that troubled analysts, voice-like sounds that weren't identifiable as human or animal. Tones or patterns that seemed structured but weren't recognizable language. In one section, what sounded like the victim's voice, saying phrases that made no linguistic sense, as if speaking in an unknown language or under compulsion to vocalize meaningless sounds. Audio forensics experts analyzed the recording. One said, parts of this recording are genuinely strange. There are vocalizations that might be the victim, but sound wrong. There are other sounds that we can't classify. And there are patterns in the audio that suggest structure or communication, but in no language we recognize. I can't say definitively what we're hearing, but it's unusual enough to be notable. Audio recordings from disappearance sites occasionally contain anomalies. Sounds that shouldn't be there, vocalizations that can't be explained, patterns that suggest communication in unknown forms. This evidence is valuable because it's objective, recorded data that can be analyzed repeatedly. Yet what the recordings capture often defies easy interpretation. Let's talk about cases where the missing person is found in a state suggesting they witnessed something traumatic before dying. Expressions or positions indicating terror. In November 2017, a hiker was found deceased in Washington. The hiker's facial expression and body position suggested extreme fear in their final moments. Medical examination confirmed they died from exposure and hypothermia. But their position lying backed against a tree, arms raised defensively, eyes wide, mouth open, suggested terror. People dying from exposure typically become lethargic and unresponsive. They don't die in defensive positions with expressions of fear. This suggests the hiker saw something that terrified them immediately before or during the process of dying. One medical examiner said, "The position and expression don't match typical exposure deaths. This person died afraid, trying to defend against something, but we found no evidence of what that something was. No animal attacks, no signs of human assault. Nothing that explains the terror. They died afraid of something that left no physical traces." Bodies showing signs of pre-death terror, without evidence of what caused the terror, appear in multiple cases. As if victims saw something in their final moments that we can't detect from evidence. This suggests the presence of something that creates fear without leaving physical traces of its presence. As we reach the true end of this exploration, we must confront the uncomfortable reality that these cases present. Thousands of people have disappeared in wilderness areas under circumstances that don't fit normal explanations. The patterns are real, documented, and disturbing. The evidence suggests something is happening that our current frameworks can't adequately explain. Whether that something is a combination of natural factors that creates perfect storms of disappearance conditions, unknown predators operating with sophistication beyond what we've recognized, human trafficking, or criminal networks using wilderness areas as cover, psychological phenomena affecting people in wilderness in ways we don't understand, temporal or dimensional anomalies occurring in specific locations, non-human intelligence that interacts with humans who enter wilderness areas, or something else entirely that we haven't imagined. The truth remains unknown. But the patterns demand acknowledgement and study. Dismissing these cases as coincidence or simple misfortune does disservice to the victims, their families, and to truth. Something is happening in our forests and wilderness areas that requires serious investigation, open-minded inquiry, and respect for the complexity of mysteries that resist easy solutions. The wilderness is not a safe playground for human recreation. It is genuinely wild, genuinely dangerous, and contains phenomena we don't fully understand. Our ancestors knew this and respected it. Modern society has forgotten this wisdom and pays the price in lives lost to mysteries we can't solve. Perhaps the ultimate lesson is humility before nature and respect for places that operate by rules we don't fully comprehend. The forests are ancient. The wilderness is vast. The mysteries are deep. And people continue to disappear into the unknown, leaving only patterns for us to study and questions we cannot answer. But there are still more layers to these mysteries that demand exploration, more patterns that need recognition, more disturbing details that complete the picture of what's happening in our wilderness areas. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's footwear was found in impossible locations. Not just missing shoes, but shoes found in places the person couldn't have reached to remove them. In May 2018, a hiker's boots were found on top of a 40-foot tall rock formation in Arizona. The formation had sheer faces and no way to climb without technical equipment. The hiker didn't have climbing gear. Yet the boots were positioned on the flat top of this formation, placed side by side, laces still tied. The hiker's body was found miles away in a completely different direction. The boots being on that rock formation made no physical sense. One investigator said, "Those boots couldn't have gotten there by any normal means. The hiker couldn't have climbed that formation. Even if somehow they did, why remove boots at the top? And how did they get down and travel miles away? And if someone else placed the boots there, who and why? It's like a message or marker, but we can't read it." Shoes in impossible locations appear in several cases. Boots on cliffs that can't be climbed. Shoes across rivers that couldn't be crossed. Footwear positioned in ways that seem intentional but inexplicable. This pattern suggests deliberate placement by something capable of reaching locations humans can't easily access, as if shoes are being collected and displayed, or as if they're being used as markers or messages. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's last known meal was found in their stomach undigested, despite significant time having passed. Digestive anomalies that don't match the timeline. In July 2019, a hiker was found deceased after being missing for 5 days. Autopsy revealed food in the stomach that was barely digested. The food was identified as the meal the hiker ate on the first day, shortly before disappearing. But 5 days had passed. Even if the person had eaten nothing else, that initial meal should have been fully digested within 24–48 hours. Yet it remained in the stomach in relatively fresh condition. The medical examiner couldn't explain the discrepancy. One pathologist said, "The state of digestion doesn't match the timeline. Either our timeline is wrong, which seems impossible given the documentation, or something about this person's metabolism was radically altered, or time was experienced differently. I don't have a satisfying medical explanation for food remaining undigested for 5 days in a deceased person." Digestive anomalies appear in several autopsy reports from these cases. Food at unexpected stages of digestion for the known timeline. Stomach contents that don't match what the person should have consumed. Physical evidence that contradicts temporal facts we think we know. This biological evidence is difficult to dismiss as coincidence or error. It points to something fundamentally strange about how time or biology operates in these cases. Let's talk about cases where search dogs tracked to a specific point and then displayed behavior suggesting vertical movement. Dogs indicating the trail goes up when there's no way to climb. In August 2016, search dogs in Montana tracked a missing child to the base of a cliff face. At the cliff, the dogs looked upward and whined, displaying behavior their handlers associated with the scent trail, continuing vertically. But the cliff was sheer rock, with no handholds or way for a small child to climb. The handlers were experienced and trusted their dog's behavior. They arranged for climbers to scale the cliff and search the top. The child was found on top of the cliff, alive. The child was 3 years old and had no climbing ability. There was no accessible route to the cliff top that a 3-year-old could navigate. Yet the child was there, as the dogs had indicated. One dog handler said, "My dog was telling me the trail went up that cliff. I've learned to trust when she indicates direction, even when it seems impossible. But I still don't understand how that child got to the top of that cliff. Someone or something carried them up. But who or what?" Dogs indicating vertical movement appears in multiple cases where victims are found in elevated positions they couldn't have reached independently. The dogs are detecting that the scent trail goes upward, which shouldn't be possible for ground-based movement. This suggests victims are being carried or lifted to these locations. But by what and how? The capability to carry a person vertically up cliff faces or into trees implies strength and climbing ability beyond what any known human or animal possesses. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person had recently purchased or acquired specific items that turned out to be useless for their situation, but significant in other ways. Purchases that seem meaningless but form patterns. In September 2017, a man purchased a large quantity of red fabric before a camping trip. Friends thought it was odd since he had no stated purpose for the fabric. The man disappeared on the trip. When his campsite was found, the red fabric had been cut into strips and tied to trees in a pattern radiating from the campsite. The pattern was geometric, deliberate, clearly intentional. But why would someone create such a pattern before disappearing? Was he trying to mark something? Signal something? Ward something away? The man was never found, only the fabric pattern remained. One investigator said that fabric pattern was created with purpose, but what purpose? Was he trying to create some kind of protective barrier? Was he marking territory? Was he leaving a message? We can't determine intent, but the deliberate pattern suggests he was responding to something, preparing for something. Pre-disappearance purchases that prove relevant in strange ways appear in several cases. Items bought that the person couldn't articulate why they needed. Supplies that suggest they were unconsciously preparing for what was coming. This pattern implies some people may have precognitive awareness that manifests as unexplained compulsions to acquire specific items. Let's talk about cases where family members receive communications seemingly from the missing person after they've been confirmed dead. Messages, calls, or contacts that shouldn't be possible. In November 2018, a woman's phone received a text message from her husband's number. Her husband had been missing for a week and was found deceased 2 days before the message arrived. The message was simple: "I'm okay. Don't worry." The phone company confirmed the message originated from the husband's device. But his phone had been recovered with his body and was in police custody when the message was sent. The phone had no battery power and couldn't have sent a message. Technical analysis found no explanation for how the message was sent. One digital forensics expert said, according to all physical evidence, that message couldn't have been sent. The phone was off, had no power, and was in a sealed evidence bag. Yet the message was sent from that number and received. We can't explain it technically, Either our understanding of how cellular networks work is flawed, or something beyond our technology sent that message. Post-death communications are rare but devastating to families who experience them. Some see them as comfort, final messages from beyond. Others find them disturbing and frightening. Regardless of interpretation, these communications represent anomalies in technology that shouldn't occur. They suggest something about consciousness, communication, or technology that we don't understand. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's blood or tissue samples showed unusual characteristics. Biological anomalies discovered during medical examination. In January 2019, autopsy of a missing person who was found deceased revealed something strange in the blood chemistry. Elevated levels of certain compounds that shouldn't be present. Not toxins or drugs, but naturally occurring chemicals at concentrations far beyond normal. Specifically, DMT and other tryptamines at levels typically only seen endogenously in the brain during near-death experiences. But these were found in peripheral blood, not brain tissue, and at concentrations far exceeding what the body normally produces. One toxicologist said, these compounds being present at these levels in peripheral blood is unusual. DMT is produced naturally in the pineal gland in tiny amounts, but these levels are orders of magnitude higher. Either this person's body was producing these chemicals at impossible rates, or they were administered externally, but we found no injection sites or evidence of administration. Blood chemistry anomalies appear in several autopsy reports. Unusual compounds, abnormal levels of normal chemicals, evidence of biological processes that shouldn't occur. This suggests something happens to victims biologically during their disappearances. Whether they're exposed to substances, whether their bodies are reacting to something, or whether their biochemistry is being altered somehow is unclear. But the physical evidence exists in their tissues. Let's talk about cases where searchers experienced shared hallucinations or visions during searches. Multiple people seeing the same impossible thing. In October 2017, a search team in Washington reported a disturbing shared experience. 4 searchers, moving as a group, all saw what they described as a shimmer in the air. Like heat distortion, but on a cool day when such distortion shouldn't occur. The shimmer was in a specific location, and all 4 searchers saw it simultaneously. As they watched, they all perceived a figure within the shimmer. Not clearly defined, but humanoid, present for several seconds, then gone as the shimmer dissipated. The searchers were disturbed enough to report this to their coordinator. When interviewed separately, all 4 described seeing the same phenomenon in the same location. One searcher said, "We all saw it. We looked at each other to confirm, and we'd all seen the same thing. A shimmer in the air, a figure inside it, then nothing. If I'd been alone, I'd question my perception. But 4 of us saw it. That's not individual hallucination. Something was there." Shared anomalous experiences during searches lend credibility to unusual phenomena reports. Mass hallucination is possible, but less likely when witnesses are trained observers who weren't expecting anything unusual. These experiences suggest something in certain wilderness areas can be perceived, even if we don't understand what it is. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's DNA was found mixed with unidentifiable genetic material. Forensic evidence suggesting contact with unknown organisms. In March 2018, forensic analysis of a victim's clothing found DNA that couldn't be matched to any known species. The unidentified DNA was mixed with the victim's own DNA in a pattern suggesting close contact. Not contamination or environmental exposure, but transfer from direct physical contact. The genetic material had some similarities to human DNA, but also significant differences. It didn't match any cataloged animal DNA either. One geneticist said, "This DNA doesn't match anything in our databases. It has some human characteristics, but also features we don't recognize. It's not simply degraded or contaminated human DNA. It appears to be from something we haven't cataloged. And the transfer pattern suggests this something had close physical contact with the victim." Unidentifiable DNA appears in a few cases where genetic analysis was performed, evidence of contact with something biological that we can't identify. This is perhaps the most tangible evidence that something unknown exists in wilderness areas. Genetic material that can be sequenced but doesn't match known life forms. This evidence deserves extensive study but often gets classified or suppressed. Let's talk about cases where witnesses describe seeing the missing person in 2 different locations simultaneously. Doppelganger sightings that can't be explained. In June 2019, a man was reported missing during a hiking trip in Oregon. 2 separate witnesses came forward independently. One witness saw the missing man on a trail heading north. Another witness saw the same man on a different trail heading south. Both sightings occurred at the same time according to the witnesses' watches and positioning of the sun. The trails were several miles apart, too far to travel between them in the time frame. Both witnesses were interviewed separately and provided detailed descriptions matching the missing man and his clothing. Neither witness knew the other or had compared notes. The man was eventually found deceased in a third location entirely. One investigator said 2 credible witnesses placed our victim in 2 different locations at the same time. Both descriptions matched perfectly, but physics doesn't allow someone to be in 2 places at once. Either one witness is mistaken about timing, which seems unlikely given their certainty, or something very strange was happening. Simultaneous sightings in different locations are rare but documented. They suggest either very good doppelgangers moving through the same areas or something beyond our understanding of physical presence. If something can mimic the appearance of missing people, that has disturbing implications. Now let's discuss cases where electronic devices recorded video or images automatically without human activation. Cameras taking pictures themselves during crucial moments. In August 2020, a missing hiker's camera was found. The camera had activated and taken a series of photos automatically. The hiker hadn't touched the camera, which was in their backpack when it activated. The photos showed views from inside the backpack, then several frames of darkness, then images of forest canopy from a high angle, as if the camera had been carried upward while somehow operating inside a closed backpack. The final images were of treetops from above, impossible angles for a ground-based photographer. Technical analysis showed the camera's automatic activation feature had been triggered by motion detection. But the motion would have had to be extreme to trigger activation through backpack fabric. One photography expert said, "Those photos are genuinely puzzling. The camera activated itself, photographed through fabric, then captured images from angles suggesting it was being carried high above ground. The angle of the final photos would require being in treetops or higher, but the camera was found on the ground with the hiker's other gear." Self-activating cameras capturing impossible images appear in several cases, as if the devices are documenting what's happening even without human operation. The images often show angles or perspectives that shouldn't be possible. This electronic evidence is valuable because it's objective, even if we can't fully interpret what it's showing. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's journal or notes from, shortly before disappearing, contain disturbing content. Written evidence of their mental state or experiences. In September 2018, a missing person's journal was found at their campsite. The final entries were disturbing. The person described feeling watched constantly. Described seeing movement and peripheral vision that vanished when looked at directly. Described hearing whispers in a language they couldn't understand. The entries became increasingly fragmented and anxious. The final entry simply said, "They're here. I have to go with them, not sure I have choice." Then the person disappeared. The journal was valuable evidence of the person's mental state before disappearing, but it raised questions about whether they were experiencing psychological breakdown or actually perceiving something. One psychologist said, "The journal shows escalating paranoia and anxiety, classic signs of psychological distress, but the specificity of the experiences, the consistent descriptions, the final entry suggesting compulsion rather than choice. These suggest the person believed they were experiencing something real, whether it was hallucination or actual perception. We can't determine from written accounts alone." Journals showing deteriorating mental state before disappearances appear in several cases. They document the victim's subjective experience leading up to the event. Whether these are records of psychological breakdown or records of actual encounters with something is debatable, but they provide valuable insight into what victims experience in the time before they disappear. Now let's discuss cases where the victim's eyes were reported by witnesses to look different shortly before disappearing. Changes in appearance that troubled observers. In July 2017, a woman on a group hiking trip started acting strangely according to other group members. They said her eyes looked wrong, though they couldn't articulate exactly how. One person described them as distant, or not focusing normally. Another said they looked darker than usual. Within an hour of these observations, the woman walked away from the group and vanished. She was found days later, deceased, with no clear cause of death. Other group members mentioned the eye changes in their statements. One said, "Her eyes were definitely different. It was subtle, but noticeable. She was looking at things, but not seeing them, or seeing something else. It troubled all of us, but we didn't know what to do. Then she just walked away like she was being called." Eye changes before disappearances are reported in several cases. Victims whose eyes appear different to observers shortly before they vanish, as if something is affecting their consciousness or perception in visible ways. Whether this is neurological, psychological, or evidence of external influence is unknown. But multiple witnesses reporting similar observations across different cases suggests a real phenomenon. Let's talk about cases where forensic analysis revealed the victim had been exposed to electromagnetic fields far stronger than natural background. Physical evidence of EM exposure. In October 2019, a body was found with unusual characteristics. The victim's watch had been magnetized. Metal objects on the person showed signs of strong magnetic exposure. Tissue samples showed cellular changes consistent with exposure to strong electromagnetic fields. But there was no source for such fields in the wilderness location where the victim was found. No power lines, no equipment, no natural magnetic anomalies strong enough to account for the exposure. One physicist analyzing the evidence said the magnetization patterns and cellular changes indicate exposure to extremely strong electromagnetic fields. We're talking Tesla-level fields far beyond anything that exists naturally in wilderness. Either this person was exposed to powerful electromagnets before death, which seems unlikely given the location, or something in that wilderness generated these fields. We have no explanation for the source. EM exposure evidence appears in several cases where detailed analysis was performed. Physical proof that victims were subjected to electromagnetic fields that shouldn't exist in wilderness settings. This suggests technology or natural phenomena beyond what we normally associate with remote areas. Now let's discuss cases where the search area experienced unusual wildlife behavior that persisted after the search ended. Long-term changes in animal activity in disappearance locations. In November 2016, after a disappearance in Montana, rangers and locals noticed ongoing changes in wildlife behavior in that area. Deer avoided the specific valley where the person disappeared. Birds didn't nest in trees in that area during the following spring. Small mammals were notably absent from what should have been suitable habitat. This continued for over 2 years before wildlife gradually began returning. One wildlife biologist said animals were clearly avoiding that area. We documented reduced populations of multiple species compared to adjacent similar habitat. Something about that location was deterring wildlife long-term. Eventually things normalized, but for 2 years, animals treated that place as dangerous or unsuitable. Persistent wildlife avoidance of disappearance sites suggests lasting changes in those locations. Something happened that animals can detect and that makes them avoid the area. Whether it's lingering scent, altered environment, or something more subtle, animals are sensitive to something humans don't perceive. This animal behavior could potentially be used as an indicator of high-risk areas. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's final moments were partially captured on social media or live streams. A digital evidence of disappearances in real time. In December 2018, a hiker was live streaming on social media while hiking alone. The stream showed normal hiking footage, the person talking about the scenery and their plans. Then mid-sentence, the person stopped talking and appeared to be listening to something off camera. They said, "What is that?" and turned the camera toward the forest. The camera showed only trees and shadows, nothing obviously unusual. The person said, "I hear someone calling my name. That's weird." They walked off trail toward where they heard the sound. Camera still recording. The stream showed increasingly dense forest, difficult terrain. The person pushing through brush. Then the person said, "I don't know where I am. The trail should be," and the sentence was never finished. The stream showed several more seconds of forest canopy. Then the phone apparently dropped, and the stream captured sky, sounds of movement, then cut out. The person was never found despite the stream data providing exact GPS coordinates and video of their route. Viewers who watched live called authorities immediately, but searches found no trace. One search coordinator said, "We had video of exactly where this person went. We had GPS data. We searched that area thoroughly, but we found nothing. No sign of the person, no sign of a struggle, no evidence of what happened after the stream cut out. It's like they vanished mid-step." Live stream disappearances are rare but devastating because viewers witness the event in real time without being able to help. The video evidence shows the person walking into normal-appearing forest and vanishing without obvious cause. This documentation is valuable but also disturbing in what it shows, or rather, what it fails to show about what happens to these people. Now let's discuss cases where local folklore about specific locations matches the patterns of actual disappearances with uncanny accuracy. Traditional stories that prove predictive. In regions of Appalachia, there are old stories about certain hollows where people disappear. The stories describe being called into the woods by voices mimicking loved ones. They describe time passing strangely for those who venture too deep. They describe people returning without memory or not returning at all. These folklore elements match documented cases in those same locations with remarkable precision. Modern disappearances in those hollows follow the exact patterns described in stories that are generations old. One folklorist said, "These aren't just stories. They're warnings based on actual patterns observed over centuries." When modern cases match ancient folklore, this closely, it suggests the stories preserve genuine knowledge about real phenomena. Dismissing folklore as primitive superstition means ignoring valuable survival information. Multiple regions have folklore that accurately describes disappearance patterns. Pacific Northwest stories about forest spirits taking people. Southwest stories about certain canyons being wrong places. Northern forest stories about things that mimic human voices. All of these folklore elements appear in modern documented cases. This suggests these phenomena have been occurring for as long as humans have been entering wilderness, and traditional peoples developed accurate knowledge about them. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's shadow was photographed in locations where the person wasn't present. Photographic anomalies involving shadows that don't match reality. In May 2019, a group of hikers took photos in Colorado. One photo showed their shadows on the ground, all accounted for from the group members. But there was an additional shadow in the image, human-shaped, not matching any person present. The shadow's angle matched the sun position, so it wasn't an artifact. It appeared to be cast by someone standing in a specific location where no one was standing. The hikers didn't notice the extra shadow when taking the photo. It was only discovered later when reviewing images. 2 weeks later, someone disappeared from that same trail. One hiker said, "We found that extra shadow in our photo. After someone disappeared there, it's like whatever takes people was there with us, casting a shadow even though we couldn't see it. That's deeply disturbing. Something was there that we couldn't perceive, but that light could interact with." Anomalous shadows in photographs from disappearance areas suggest the presence of something that affects light but isn't directly visible. Whether this is interdimensional presence, very sophisticated camouflage, or something else is speculative. But the photographic evidence of shadows without visible casters is difficult to dismiss. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's body was found with belongings that weren't theirs. Unknown items discovered with victims. In August 2018, a body was found with a small carved stone in the pocket. The stone had been deliberately carved with symbols that weren't recognized. The victim's family confirmed the stone wasn't something the person owned or carried. It had been placed in their pocket at some point during or after their disappearance. Analysis of the stone showed it was local rock, carved with tools that left specific marks suggesting handmade crafting. But who carved it, what the symbols mean, and who placed it with the victim remains unknown. One investigator said, "That carved stone was deliberately placed with the victim. It's too specific to be coincidental. Someone or something left it there, possibly as a marker, message, or ritual object. But we can't determine meaning or source." Unknown objects found with victims appear in several cases. Carved items, unusual natural objects, things that weren't in the victim's possession originally. These items suggest interaction with others during the disappearance. But the nature of those others and their intent remains mysterious. Let's talk about cases where massive searches found nothing but casual hikers found victims immediately after searches concluded. The pattern of bodies appearing after official searches end. In September 2019, a massive 10-day search in Oregon found no trace of a missing person. Hundreds of searchers, dogs, helicopters, drones, all found nothing. The search was officially ended due to low probability of finding the person alive. The day after the search ended, a casual hiker found the body on a main trail that had been searched daily. The body was visible from the trail, not concealed or hidden. Multiple search teams had walked that trail during the 10-day search. Yet none saw the body that was obviously present the day after they stopped looking. One SR member said, "We walked that trail every day. I personally was on that trail 5 times during the search. That body was not there. I'm certain of it. Then civilian finds it the day after we quit. It was placed there after we stopped searching. But by who or what?" Bodies appearing immediately after searches end is one of the most disturbing patterns. It suggests active concealment during searches, followed by deliberate revelation afterward. As if whatever is responsible waits until official searches conclude before allowing bodies to be found. This implies intelligence, awareness of search activities, and deliberate interaction with search efforts. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's clothing was found turned inside out. Not removed, but inverted as if someone helped them undress and redress. In November 2017, a body was found wearing a jacket that was inside out. The jacket had been put on inside out, not removed and abandoned. The person was wearing it inside out when they died. Other clothing items were also inverted. This is difficult to explain. People removing clothes due to paradoxical undressing don't typically turn them inside out first, and putting clothes on inside out, especially multiple items, suggests either severe confusion or assistance from someone. One investigator said that clothing being inside out suggests someone helped this person. You don't accidentally put on multiple items inside out. Either the victim was so confused they dressed themselves wrong, or someone dressed them. Neither explanation is satisfying given the circumstances. Inside-out clothing appears in enough cases to be notable. It suggests involvement of others in the victim's final hours. But who these others are, and why they would dress victims in inverted clothing, is unknown. Let's talk about cases where sounds recorded in disappearance areas match descriptions from folklore and mythology. Audio documentation of legendary phenomena. In October 2020, audio recording equipment set up for wildlife research in Washington captured unusual sounds. The sounds matched traditional descriptions of Wendigo calls or Sasquatch screams from indigenous folklore. Not animal sounds easily identifiable, but vocalizations that seem to combine human and animal characteristics. The sounds occurred in an area where several disappearances had happened over the years. Acoustic analysis couldn't match the sounds to any known animal species. One bioacoustics expert said these vocalizations are unusual. They have human-like qualities in their complexity and variation, but the fundamental frequency and harmonic structure don't match human vocal anatomy. They don't match any documented animal calls either. They're genuinely anomalous. Audio documentation that matches folklore descriptions adds credibility to traditional knowledge. If indigenous peoples described specific sounds accurately centuries ago, and modern equipment records those same sounds, the folklore was based on real observations. This suggests taking traditional warnings and descriptions seriously rather than dismissing them as mythology. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person's gut microbiome showed changes inconsistent with their known diet and environment. Biological evidence of exposure to unknown environments. In January 2020, analysis of a victim's intestinal contents revealed bacterial species not normally found in humans. The bacteria were environmental species, but not from the local environment where the person was found. They were bacteria typically found in much different conditions, different temperature ranges, different chemical environments, as if the person had been in a completely different ecosystem during their missing time. One microbiologist said the bacterial species we found shouldn't be in a human gut, and definitely shouldn't survive there. They're environmental bacteria from conditions that don't exist in that geographic region. This person was somewhere with very different environmental conditions than where they disappeared or where they were found, but we can't determine where that somewhere was. Microbiome evidence suggesting exposure to different environments is rare but compelling. It's biological proof that victims were in locations with different conditions than the search area. Whether these locations are distant geographically or different in other ways is unclear. But the evidence suggests victims go to or are taken to places that aren't immediately obvious. Let's talk about cases where the missing person's teeth showed unusual wear patterns or damage consistent with extreme force. Dental evidence suggesting trauma. In March 2019, a victim's dental examination revealed wear patterns that the forensic odontologist couldn't explain. Teeth showed grinding and impact damage inconsistent with normal bite forces. The damage pattern suggested the person had bitten down with forces exceeding what human jaw muscles can generate, as if experiencing extreme stress response that somehow allowed superhuman bite force, or as if external force had been applied to the jaw, crushing teeth together. One forensic dentist said, the dental damage indicates forces beyond normal human capability. Either this person experienced something that caused them to bite with impossible strength, or something crushed their jaw closed with extreme force. Neither explanation fits comfortable scenarios. Dental anomalies appear in several cases where detailed examination was possible. Evidence of forces or behaviors that exceed normal human capabilities. This physical evidence is difficult to explain without invoking either extraordinary circumstances or external forces acting on victims. Now let's discuss cases where the search area experienced unusual atmospheric pressure changes during the disappearance window. Barometric anomalies coinciding with disappearances. In June 2018, weather monitoring equipment near a disappearance site in Montana recorded sudden extreme pressure changes. The barometric pressure dropped rapidly, then recovered in a pattern that didn't match any known weather phenomenon. The changes occurred specifically during the estimated window when the person disappeared. Meteorologists reviewing the data said the pressure changes didn't correlate with storm systems or atmospheric conditions that would normally cause such fluctuations. One meteorologist said, "Those pressure changes are anomalous. Nothing in the weather patterns explains such rapid fluctuation. It's like a localized pressure void appeared and disappeared. We've never seen patterns like this in natural weather." Pressure anomalies during disappearances suggest possible atmospheric disturbances connected to the events. Whether these disturbances are cause or effect is unclear, but the correlation between unusual barometric readings and disappearance times is notable. Let's talk about cases where victims were found with their hands in positions suggesting they were trying to protect or shield themselves. Defensive postures that indicate awareness of threat. In July 2019, a body was found with hands raised and positioned as if defending against something from above. The position was maintained post-mortem, indicating it was the position at time of death. People dying from exposure don't typically maintain defensive positions. They become weak and collapse. This person died while actively defending against something. One medical examiner said, "The position suggests this person saw something threatening coming from above and raised their hands to protect themselves in their final moments." But we found no evidence of what the threat was. No animal attack injuries, no trauma from falling objects, nothing that explains the defensive posture. Defensive postures in death appear in several cases. Bodies positioned as if warding off threats that left no physical evidence. This suggests victims perceive danger in their final moments, even when forensic evidence doesn't reveal what that danger was. Now let's discuss cases where the missing person had recently experienced vivid dreams about their own disappearance. Precognitive dreams that prove accurate. In August 2017, a woman told her sister about recurring nightmares. In the dreams, she was lost in the woods, unable to find her way out, feeling watched and pursued. The dreams were vivid and specific, including details about the landscape. 2 weeks later, the woman went on a hiking trip and disappeared. She was found deceased in a location that matched the landscape from her dreams remarkably closely. Her sister said she described that place in her dreams before she ever went there. She saw her own death location in nightmares. If I'd understood that, if I'd taken it seriously, maybe I could have stopped her from going. But who believes dreams predict the future? Precognitive dreams appear in several cases. Victims who dream about forests, disappearances, or specific locations before it happens to them. This suggests some people have temporal sensitivity or precognitive awareness that manifests in dreams. Whether this is truly seeing the future or a psychological phenomenon that coincidentally matches events is debatable. But the pattern is too consistent to be entirely coincidental. As we truly approach the end of this exhaustive exploration, we must acknowledge the cumulative weight of all these patterns, all this evidence, all these disturbing details. Individually, any case can be explained away through some combination of natural causes, human error, coincidence, or misinterpretation. But collectively, when you see the same impossible elements appearing across hundreds of cases, the conventional explanations become increasingly inadequate. Too many people found in previously searched areas. Too many victims in locations their physical capabilities couldn't reach. Too many search dogs failing in the same unusual ways. Too many shoes missing or placed impossibly. Too many bodies near water, despite starting far from it. Too many temporal anomalies between subjective and objective time. Too many biological anomalies that shouldn't exist. Too many technological failures in specific patterns. Too many precognitive warnings that prove accurate. Too many witnesses seeing things they can't explain. Too many folklore traditions that accurately describe modern events. Too many physical evidence items that don't fit normal scenarios. The accumulation demands that we take these cases seriously, as a phenomenon requiring investigation beyond conventional approaches. Something is happening in wilderness areas that our current frameworks don't adequately explain. Whether that something involves unknown predators with capabilities beyond recognized wildlife, human criminal activity using sophisticated methods we haven't uncovered, psychological phenomena affecting people in wilderness in systematic ways, environmental factors creating conditions that disorient and endanger visitors, temporal or dimensional phenomena occurring in specific locations, non-human intelligence interacting with humans who enter their territory, some combination of factors creating complex scenarios, or something entirely beyond our current imagination. The truth remains elusive, but the patterns demand acknowledgement. These are not random tragedies. These are systematic events following recognizable patterns. And those patterns have been occurring for as long as humans have been entering wilderness, possibly longer. Our ancestors knew something was dangerous in forests. They developed warnings, taboos, protective practices, folklore that preserved their knowledge. Modern society dismissed this wisdom as primitive superstition. We believe technology and rationality made us immune to whatever our ancestors feared. But the disappearances continue. The patterns persist. The victims accumulate. And we're forced to confront the possibility that our ancestors were right about dangers in wilderness that transcend the obvious physical hazards. The forests are genuinely wild in ways that extend beyond what we normally mean by that word. They operate by rules and harbor presences that we don't fully understand or recognize. They're not safe playgrounds for recreation, but genuinely dangerous places where phenomena beyond our comprehension can affect those who enter unprepared or unaware. The lesson of Missing 411 is humility before mystery. Recognition that despite our technology and knowledge, we remain vulnerable to forces we can't control or even properly identify. Respect for places that have their own character, their own dangers, their own rules that don't answer to human understanding. An acknowledgement that some questions don't have answers yet, some mysteries resist solving, and some dangers persist despite our best efforts to understand or prevent them. If you venture into wilderness, do so with awareness that you're entering territory that isn't entirely known or safe. Prepare appropriately with equipment and knowledge. Stay with others. Never isolate yourself in remote areas. Trust instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why. Respect warnings from those who know the land better than you do. And understand that no amount of preparation guarantees safety against phenomena we don't fully comprehend. The wilderness is ancient, vast, mysterious, and dangerous. It has taken people throughout human history and will continue to do so. We can only hope to minimize risk through awareness, preparation, and respect. But we cannot eliminate risk entirely because we don't fully understand what we're facing. Sleep now with this comprehensive knowledge of what's happening in our forests. Use this knowledge to make informed decisions about wilderness activities. Share it with others who might benefit from awareness. Remember it when you hear about new disappearances that follow these patterns. And most importantly, respect the wilderness for what it truly is. Not a place that owes you safety, but a genuinely wild and mysterious place where things happen that resist explanation. The forests remember everything that occurs beneath their ancient canopy. The mountains hold secrets in their eternal stone. The wilderness preserves mysteries that we may never solve. And people will continue to disappear into these mysteries, leaving only patterns for us to study and questions we struggle to answer. May you never become part of these patterns. May you never experience what thousands have experienced. May you never disappear into the woods without explanation, leaving loved ones to wonder what happened. Stay safe, stay aware, stay together, and respect the wilderness for the mysterious, dangerous, ancient place it truly is. The woods are dark and deep. The mysteries are real and unsolved. The dangers are ongoing and persistent. And the forest is waiting, patient as only ancient things can be patient, for those who venture into its depths without adequate respect for what it truly is. Good night. May your dreams be free from the forest's mysteries. May you wake with wisdom to stay safe. May you never need the knowledge you've gained tonight. But if you do venture into wilderness, may this knowledge guide you to make choices that keep you safe. The patterns are real. The dangers are documented. The mysteries remain unsolved. And the wilderness continues its ancient wait, holding secrets it will never voluntarily reveal. Good night. The forests remember. The mountains know. The wilderness keeps its counsel. And some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Sleep well and be safe. Always be safe. The woods are waiting. And they're not telling their secrets to anyone. Good night.